Hey folks, Andy the Taxman here. Now, before we jump into this month's deep dive episode, I have one small favor to ask of each and every one of you. I am absolutely thrilled to announce that Grappling with Canada is an eligible participant in the Canadian Podcast Awards for 2022. We are thrilled to be able to be nominated in several different categories, so here's what I need from each and every one of you listeners. Simply go to canpodawards.ca, quickly make a profile, it takes about 30 seconds, and you can nominate Grappling with Canada in several different categories, such as Outstanding Debut for a Series, Outstanding Sports Series, Outstanding Society and Culture Series, and most of all, my favorite, Best Host in a Series. Once again, canpodawards.ca. The voting closes on July 13th, so run, don't walk, to canpodawards.ca and quickly make your profile and vote for Grappling with Canada in each and every eligible category available. It would mean the world to me, and let's see if we can bring home some gold for some Canadian professional wrestling history. If you missed all that, you can catch the link in the show notes for today's episode. Once again, voting ends on July 13th, so once again, run! Don't walk, and vote for Grappling with Canada for the Canadian Podcast Awards of 2022. And thank you all very much in advance. Hello everyone, and
Welcome back
to Grappling with Canada, but more importantly, on this day, July 1st, Happy Canada Day to all of my fellow Canadians, both in country and abroad. And by extension, happy early 4th of July to our neighbors down south. Boy, oh boy, this is such a tremendous time of year for myself personally, as you can tell by me showing my nationalistic side, playing the Canadian National Anthem to kind of kick off the program today. And speaking about nationalistic side, boy, oh boy, the topic that we're going to be covering today, you almost can't talk about Canadian professional wrestling history without mentioning Whipper Billy Watson. So to say that I'm really looking forward to this one, and to say that it fits 100% with the theme of Canada Day is probably the biggest understatement I'm going to make in the program tonight. So I'm really looking forward to our subject matter tonight, and I'm really looking forward to the information that we've been able to uncover and that we will be able to impart onto each and every one of you, whether you're listening to this on July 1st, whether you're listening to this maybe under the weather, wink wink nudge nudge, on July 2nd, or hopefully before you're listening, or hopefully that you're listening to this, I should say, before July 13th. Why that date's important, I'm going to get to in a second. But first, if this is your first time to Grappling with Canada, welcome to the program. I would strongly suggest that you go in the back catalog to hear some tremendous episodes, not just because I've done them, but most importantly for the guests that have been on the episodes. We've covered such topics as George Gordienko, a 2-part episode on Roddy Piper, Billy Two Rivers, Chief Don Eagle, Gene Kiniski, Stu Hart, Monster Ripper. The list goes on and on and on. And every month we just build this catalog of fascinating stories, but more importantly than that, incredible guests. So once again, go in the back catalog on whatever podcasting platform that you are listening to this program on right now. Whether that be Apple Podcasts, Amazon Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Good Pods, Spotify, wherever you buy, sell, trade, barter, and my favorite, steal your favorite podcasts, you can find Grappling With Canada. While you're there, if you could leave a 5-star rating and a written review on each available podcasting platform, most important if you could do that on Apple Podcasts, what happens is I will read your 5-star written review on the next available program when I see it pop up in my feed, if you will. So once again, if you're listening to this program, go ahead and 5-star, do your best. Listen to me talk. It's early in the program. It's not even July 1st yet, and we're revved up on this side of things. And I think as we get into tonight's program, you're going to understand why. But before I get ahead of myself, hit that 5-star subscription gimmick, if you will. Do your best, Dave Meltzer, as good friend of the show, BC Hunter would say. And leave a written review as well, especially on Apple Podcasts, and I'll make sure that I read it on the next available program. I want to thank everybody for checking out last month's episode on Angelo Mosca. Wow, the response that I got off that episode is absolutely incredible, and I'm just, what a testament to, first off, the guests that I had on that episode. AC and Steve Milton were just incredible, which kind of follows part and parcel the kind of thing that we're doing here. Expanding the reach of Canadian professional wrestling history, because it's not just about the wrestling. It's about the personal stories. It's about who these men and women were, what they meant to their communities, what they meant to Canada. And you can't tell that story without the fantastic guests that we have on each and every month. So, once again, thanks everybody for the positive feedback for checking out the Angelo Mosca episode. If you haven't checked it out, don't stop this program per se, but once you're on this one, hop in the Wayback Machine, if you will, and check out that one. It was really, really an eye-opening experience for myself personally, being a huge CFL fan, to go back and relive a lot of the league history through the eyes of Mosca, and then obviously the wrestling side of things was a real treat for me personally. Also, in the back catalog are the bi-monthly specials that we've been covering lately with Grappling with Canada. One of which is very important to today's episode. Now, the Nanjo Singh episode that was released as a special a couple of days ago. I understand that it wasn't for everybody. I put content warnings all over that thing for very specific reasons. And thank you everybody who reached out and complimented me on how tactfully I handled the subject matter. It was not easy for me to go into that much detail on such a horrific subject. And I spent a lot of time, agonizing. Maybe agonizing is the wrong word to say, but it's probably apt here with the way that my mind works, and friends of mine will know exactly what I'm talking about. But I spent a lot of time, wondering, should I put it out there? Should I dedicate the space to it? How do you do it properly? How do you not sensationalize it? How do you keep personal feelings out of it? Because, I would never want this program to be something where, we're capitalizing on somebody's misery or misfortune. That's kind of the problem I have with a lot of the true crime podcasts, and a lot of them are Canadian, and some of them I used to listen to until they got very personalized, if you will. And I have a very hard time with a lot of the personal opinion that gets injected into horrific stories like that. So I tried very hard on that episode to separate my personal feelings from the facts. And I think I did a good job, and from all the feedback I've gotten thus far, it seems like the majority of you think so as well. So if you have not listened to that episode, again, it's not easy to listen to. I want to make no bones about that. However, it does tie in 100% with the subject matter that we're talking today, Whipper Billy Watson. So, if you haven't listened to that, I would suggest that maybe you want to hit this one on pause and backtrack it to that special episode and listen to that one, and then jump right back into this one. It's about a half an hour. So it's not like our usual, not our usual, 2 to 4 hour deep dive episodes. But it does impart some very important information that is tied directly into today's episode. And I think you'll understand, once you listen to that, why I chose to do it that way specifically. Oh boy, now that I got rid of all of that, let's talk about some fun stuff. Ways that you can interact with the show. Most important, on Twitter, you can tweet me at 6_podcast. You can email me at any time, 6sidepod@gmail.com. I read everything that you guys send, and I truly do appreciate it all. You can find us on Facebook. Use that Facebook Facebook pages. I'm getting ahead of myself. Facebook pages section. Type in Grappling with Canada. Come on in and like the Facebook page. And the group, Canadian Professional Wrestling History. The group's been growing by leaps and bounds. There's been a ton of fun information that has been passed around from various people, whether it's family history, whether it's people discovering things that they never knew before, whether it's people showing stuff from their childhood, or newer fans just exploring and getting into this stuff. It's really a treat. So come on into the Canadian Professional Wrestling History Facebook group. It's open to everybody, and go ahead and post your favorite Canadian Professional Wrestling History moments, pictures, thoughts, whatever. It's all welcome, and it's all good, and we all love to see it. It's such a great meeting place for us fans of the people and of the sport itself. You can also interact with the show on YouTube, youtube.com/C/6sidepodcast. We're still inching, crawling, struggling, pulling ourselves to 1,000 subscribers. So even if you listen to this one on the podcasting platform of your choice, I would suggest that you go ahead and subscribe to this show on YouTube. If you're listening to this, note that the Angelo Mosca episode should be up. I hope to have it up in about a week, and the Whipper Billy Watson episode that you're listening to right now should be up on that platform a week after that. I've been buried in paperwork is probably the best way I can say it. So, yeah, it's coming. Trust me. So go ahead and subscribe, hit the notification button, and then when those pop up, you will know that they're on there, and you guys can check them out. As well, I should also mention, in regards to these special episodes, if you'll recall, a few months ago, I had Vance Nevada on, and he was talking about the upcoming book, Uncontrolled Chaos, Canada's remarkable professional wrestling history book that he's going to be releasing in a couple of months. I'm going to have Vance on the program again very soon. You guys are honestly running out of time to get any and all questions in to Vance, because it's going to be a Q&A episode that I have Vance Nevada on next for the second part of our series covering his book and his research on such. So, send your questions to 6sidepod 6underscorepod@gmail.com. You can also tweet them to me at 6_podcast. You can even shoot me a message off of the Facebook page or off of the Facebook group as well, and I'll make sure that they make air. We've got a fantastic amount of responses, some really, really, really well thought out questions. I've been very impressed by the amount of thought and information that have gone into some of these questions, and I cannot wait to read them in. But you guys are running out of time, so please, as I said at the start of this episode with the Canadian Podcast Awards issue, run, don't walk, and get your questions in sooner rather than later to make sure that they make air, because that's going to be a very fun episode. And as you guys heard from both the Roddy Piper episode, part 1 that Vance was on, and the special episode dedicated to his book, Vance is an absolute treasure trove of information. And let's see if we get some questions that'll pick even his brain. I think that'd be a lot of fun to figure out if we can stump Vance, if you will. All right. A couple other things that I want to touch on, a little bit of housekeeping before we really jump into today's episode, is ways that you can support this program. You can donate to this program. I know times are tough right now. Inflation is through the roof, and it's absolutely insane. However, if you're able to spare a couple of bucks, everything that you guys donate goes directly back into the show. So a couple of ways you can do that is on the Good Pods app. If you're on that, there's the tip function. You can also use the Linktree link in your show notes. There are the PayPal direct link. You can donate that way. And you can also buy me a beer, because it is heading into hot summer weather here in friendly Winnipeg, Manitoba. You can buy me a beer over at buymeacoffee.com/grappling. As well, in regards to helping out the program, I have a fantastic idea, although I need to see what the laws are here in Manitoba, because we have some interesting laws about fundraising. However, suffice it to say that in the next month or so, I'm going to be doing a fundraiser of sorts, which may involve a piece of hardware that you can wear around your waist, which may be a symbol from a 3-letter wrestling organization, one of the most famous in wrestling history, with lineage tracing back to, well, they kind of co-opted it from the 1930s, but we're going to say that they started in about the 40s. If you read between the lines, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. Keep it locked on all social media for what's happening with that style of a fundraiser for this program. Once again, on Twitter at 6_podcast, on the Facebook group and the Facebook page. And also you can find us on Instagram, instagram.com/Grappling With Canada. Now, in my opinion, the most important way to support the show right now, so if you're listening to this before July 13th, please, I implore you, run, don't walk to the Canadian Podcast Awards, canpodawards.ca. Once again, you can find that link in your show notes of today's program, and vote for Grappling With Canada. There are several categories that we're eligible for. Once you create your profile, you'll be able to use the nominate tab. You'll be able to go through all of those, and you can honestly go through each and every category to see what Grappling With Canada is eligible for, because if you type in Grappling With Canada on the nomination section, it'll automatically see if we're eligible or not. So anything that we're eligible for, if you guys can go ahead and nominate us, it would be absolutely mind-blowing. Could you imagine? Just think about this one for a second. And not even just because it's my program, whatever, who cares about that? But imagine for a second, a Canadian pro wrestling history podcast winning an award. Wow. Would be unbelievable. So please, if if you could do one special well, I'm going to ask you to do something way later in the program, but if you could do one thing for me while you're listening to this deep dive program, go ahead to canpodawards.ca and vote for Grappling with Canada. Once again, voting ends, I'm pretty sure, on July 13th, so don't wait. Get it done right now when you're listening to this program, and I truly appreciate each and every one of you who votes for us, and let's see if we can make something happen and make some noise in the Canadian podcast scene. A couple of things that I wanted to touch on as well before we get into tonight's program is a couple of programs that I was very fortunate to be on a guest on. So this didn't make air before the Angelo Mosca episode, unfortunately, but I was so pleased to be a guest twice now. My second time a guest on the Wrestling with the Truth podcast. BC Hunter was short a couple of co-hosts and he had me on. We were talking about a little bit of the ridiculousness surrounding some of the modern wrestling deathmatch kind of stuff. And we had some, well, I will say that I had some interesting takes on that. We were in agreement on a couple of things I think I was a little bit more militant about than BC Hunter was, but he was such a gracious guest. We had a blast. It was about an hour long of the program, and we talked forever. And what a great guy! And shout out to BC. I know Wrestling with the Truth is going kind of an overhaul right now, and they got some interesting stuff in the works. So I'm looking forward to seeing what they end up coming back with. I know it's their 1 year anniversary right around the corner, so I'm looking forward to seeing what happens with them. So you can follow them on Twitter at WWTTPod. Great group of guys, and I'm looking forward to see what they do in the near future. Another program that I was very fortunate to be a guest on is regarding the two gentlemen who are joining the program tonight. I was fortunate to be on an episode of the National Wrestling Clipping Alliance podcast with Wes and Jess. And we were talking about some Canadian professional wrestling cards that span all the way from PEI to BC. And our thoughts on the cards, our thoughts on the people involved. Boy, oh boy, we got into the weeds of just some wrestling history. We had a fantastic conversation, and they had, credit to them, they had a great idea to go province to province to talk about something from each province, whether it was a match, whether it was an individual, whether it was some history. And boy, oh boy, I learned so much from them, and I had such an absolute pleasure of a time. And I'm really hoping that if you're listening to this, I think that one will air about a week after this program debuts. So keep it locked on their YouTube channel. I'm going to be putting a link to that in today's show notes as well, so you don't want to miss that. It was a lot of fun, and I think you'll hear from my conversations with Wes and Jess today that they do it for the love of, wrestling history, kind of like myself. And when you get, three people like that together, it just, boy oh boy, 45 minutes turns into like almost 2 hours real quick. And it was such an absolute honor and treat for me to be on there. And I had such a blast. So I guess I've kind of spoiled a little bit of the stuff today in my incessant rambling, because today on our Whipper Billy Watson episode, I have the two gentlemen from the National Wrestling Clipping Alliance podcast, Wes and Jess. Now, some of you may be familiar with them with the stuff that they've done with the Ontario Wildman podcast via the Dave Dynasty Network. Just a couple of great guys who love the history of professional wrestling and are doing their very best to kind of spread this thing. And what they've done with their clipping pages on Facebook, which we get into as well in the program, as well as what they impart on Twitter, is just, it's a lot of great stuff. And a bit of the conversation that we had, on and off air, both, on my program and their program is, regarding this odd monopolization of wrestling history. And I'm sorry, I'm going to step on my soapbox for just a minute before we get into tonight's program. So, professional wrestling history and historians have an odd dynamic with each other, I find. And, you'll often find either people are very upfront and forward with the information that they find. They want to share everything they find. They want to put it out there for everybody to enjoy and everybody to get a taste of it, if you will. Wes and Jess, in my opinion, are perfect, absolutely perfect examples of this. Unfortunately, on the other side, you have some, professional wrestling historians, and I will use that word semi-loosely, who, for some reason, have this guarded or gated view on professional wrestling history that if they come across it, they own it, right? If they buy it on eBay or whatever, they own it. They don't share it. They don't tell anybody. It's there now. It's in their purview and it's theirs. And I kind of think that that's the wrong way to go about all this stuff. So, I hope that in our conversation today, Wes and Jess will impart on you, the listener, the fact that we as not just wrestling fans, not just wrestling historians, not just Canadian history buffs, not just, not specifically parts of these, but as a whole, that we'll do a better job of passing information on, because, all it takes is somebody to pass away and it's gone. And it's awful to say, but man, we've seen it too often, especially lately. And what a shame it would be to lose out on some of this professional wrestling history, some of this Canadian history, for the simple fact of ownership. And that's all I'm going to say about that. So, without further ado, let's jump into tonight's episode. But before we do that, as I always do, let's hear a little bit of match audio from Whipper Billy Watson. And then let's dive right in to learn about the Whipper. Please enjoy.
There's a whip into the ropes. You can hear the ring shattering when the Chief hits. The wrist lock. Actually, there's a judo hold in there. He's putting pressure on the back of that left hand. Chief gave up, and a judo hold of Whipper Watson wanted into this one. That's a new one the Whip's developed. The Chief had to call it an early evening. Here's Manny Weiss with the time on it.
The time, 4 minutes, 56 seconds. The winner, Billy Whipper Watson.
Whipper Billy Watson, the winner. Over Chief Chiwaki, the end came suddenly as the Whip applied his special finishing hold, and there's some conversation about it.
William John Potts was born June 25th, 1915 in East York, Ontario, which is now a part of the Toronto area. He was born to an English-born father, John Potts, and a Canadian-born mother, Alice Mary Wilkin. Watson began wrestling in Toronto under his real name. He was a member of the Scarborough Athletic Club in the mid-1930s and was wrestling on what was once billed as amateur wrestling shows in Toronto. An important distinction here is that at the time, there was a couple of factions in Canada. There was the Amateur Athletic Association out of Toronto, I believe, and there was the Professional Athletic Association out of Montreal. Now, at the time, there was a big divide between the two associations and who could work with who and what wrestlers could wrestle under what banner. And, perhaps that's a topic of conversation that I'll have to explore in a later episode, if you will. Not that I want to telegraph too much, but it is an interesting dynamic and something that will play a part later on in both this episode and later episodes of Grappling with Canada. But really, who was Whipper Billy Watson? I think we should explain a little bit about the man before we go into all of the depth and detail that we're going to get into later on the program tonight. So, for a little bit of biographical background, I'm going to reference an article written by a friend of the show, Greg Oliver, for one of my favorite wrestling sites, slamwrestling.net. So in this article titled Remembering Whipper Billy Watson, this is from March of 2000. Greg goes on to write, "It's been 10 years since we lost Whip to a heart attack. But how does one explain the appeal, the legacy of Toronto's William Potts, aka Whipper Billy Watson today, to today's wrestling fan? Well, by talking to a few wrestlers who knew him inside and outside the square circle. Quote, the thing that I remember about Watson is that every time you beat him, you had to fight your way out of the ring," explained Don Leo Jonathan, laughing at the recollection. Such was the fervor that Watson inspired in the faithful of Southern Ontario and of Western New York. Watson began his wrestling career in 1936 in England, and it lasted until 1971, when an automobile accident forced him from the ring and into tirelessly working with charitable organizations on a full-time basis. Now, that's something that we're going to discuss in great detail later on in the episode tonight. The Whip knew no shame in using his celebrity to further the causes of the right and the just. In the ring, Watson was just the one dealing out the justice. Always the fan favorite, he virtually controlled the Toronto promotion owned by Frank Tunney. Quote, he was the boss, so if you didn't want to do exactly what he wanted, he would go back to the office, recalled Hans Schmidt, one of these famous goose-stepping German heels of the post-World War II era. Again, somebody that we're going to talk about later on in this program. When you go in the ring with him, I've wrestled him about 1,000 times. It would have to be his way. Otherwise, things would stink a little bit, added Schmidt. If you don't do like he says, like he wants, he may not talk to you for a week. Gene Kiniski was another one of those killer heels that made Whipper all the more famous for fighting off his evil ways. Something that we're going to get into, again, way later in this program. Quote, I wrestled him so many, many times. I think I wrestled him in every city and village in Canada, said Kiniski. In fact, the first time we met was in Newfoundland. My God, you couldn't get near the airport. They had the largest crowd in the history of Newfoundland to welcome him. Kiniski knew his role. Quote, when I wrestled him, people went in there to see me get beat. And I'd just go out. I'd had a flamboyant style. I'd just give them action, 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 because I'm a rough, tough son of a gun. And, as a result, we just drew so much money. End quote. Throughout the matches, it was Watson in control. Gene Kiniski would say, he was coaching and I was doing all of the offensive work. Lou Thez beat Watson for the NWA World title on 2 separate occasions. The first time was on April 25th in Indianapolis, and then Lou Thez lost the title to Watson on March 15th, 1956 in Toronto via countout, and won it back on November 9th of that same year in St. Louis. Altogether, Thez figured that he only fought Watson a half dozen times, though. He agreed with the assessment that Watson wanted his way in the ring, but Thez said that to counter that, he just out-wrestled him. Despite his lack of praise for Watson's in-ring ability, Thez did recognize the importance of both Watson and his French-Canadian equivalent Yvan Robert, and the roles that they played in the lives of their fans. Watson and Robert were both promoted very well and really, really did a good job. They had a great deal of visibility, and they did well. And both of them drew a lot of money for their promoters and did very, very well. Though Mormon giant Don Leo Jonathan, as an American living in Canada, heard a lot of griping about Watson's title reign. Now that's something that we're going to talk about a little bit later on in the episode today. Quote, "That time when he had the championship, there was a lot of guys that figured that he shouldn't have it. And they were out to get it. They were hitting him pretty hard. They would say, 'What does Canadian do with the World Championship anyways?' You know, that was the attitude," Jonathan explained. Nobody liked it even when Yvan Robert had the championship. There's a lot of good wrestlers in the States, and that was sort of an affront to them. It's like the Stanley Cup going to New Jersey. Whipper Watson also had an impact on many of the younger wrestlers, some of whom were just breaking in as his career was winding down. Paul LeDuc was Watson's partner for one match in Cornwall, Ontario in 1965. "It was a big, big, big souvenir for me," he said. Ronnie Garvin wrestled Watson at the end of his career, at the beginning of his own. Garvin remembered being in awe of the whip. Quote, "He was a big star and I was just starting," Garvin said. Of course, all of this merely takes into account Watson the wrestler, not Watson the man, Watson the community leader, or Watson the champion of charity, something that we are going to get into big time in today's episode. Again from Kiniski, quote, "He was just a phenomenal individual. I can't, to be honest, speak highly enough for him, about him. He was a great, great asset to the world of professional sports. He was known worldwide, and of course his name, Whipper Billy Watson, was synonymous with wrestling in Canada." And in my opinion, that article is really a great jumping off point to kind of give you a bird's eye view of not only Whipper Watson, the person, Whipper Watson, the wrestler, but what he meant to the Toronto area and then to all of the wrestlers in the Canadian professional wrestling scene at the time. Again, something that we're going to dive deep into today's episode. So to get us there, first up are my conversations with one of the gentlemen from the National Clipping Wrestling Alliance podcast. Now, normally they are a tag team, but you know me, I always like to throw a swerve, if you will, and we've split them up into singles action for this episode. So first up, we're going to be talking to Jesse. Jess has done an incredible amount of work learning about Whipper Watson. He's got binders upon binders. He has clippings upon clippings, and just he knows so much and has so much backstory, has so much factual, more important information about Whipper Watson. And we have a great conversation, not so much going through the year-to-year aspect of, you know, where Whipper was, what he did, kind of things like that, but we picked the high points of what happened and really dive deep into them. And I think it really paints a picture of who Whipper Watson was and what he meant more specifically to the Toronto scene, to the Canadian wrestling scene, and also what he meant internationally. So before we get into my conversation with Jess, I'm going to play some in-ring action involving Whipper Watson. And on the other side, one half of the National Clipping or National Wrestling Clipping Alliance podcast, Jess. Please enjoy.
Guaranteed to tear your head right off your shoulders. There's Watson riding piggyback and applying what looks to be a strangle. You'll note that the forearm is under the chin, but Moscato says no. Here's Watson rocking Big Ed Miller into dreamland. Miller is out like a light. Watson, the winner. The team of Bobo Brazil, Whipper Bill Watson, win the second fall over Big Ed Miller and Dan Miller, the brother combination from Columbus, Ohio. And now Watson is applying the same treatment to Dan Miller, although the fall is officially called by Sergeant Joe Moscato, the referee. Well, it's going to take another one to decide it. Here comes ring announcer Manny White. Bobo Brazil just put a cocoa butt, which is his favorite finishing hold, on Dan Miller. And now Dan is in sweet dreamland. Well, I couldn't hear, but I think Manny White said 5 minutes and 10 seconds, the time of the fall. Whipper Billy Watson and Bobo Brazil over the Miller brothers, Dan and Ed, and that squares the match at a fall apiece.
All right, I'm pleased to be joined on the line right now by one half of the National Wrestling Clipping Alliance tag team, Jess. How you doing, man?
Thank you. Hello. Thanks for having me out, man. I'm so excited to be here.
Now that we're on round 2 from various technical difficulties from the first time we were going to record, but I'm so happy to have you on tonight for quite the topic that we're covering this month, Whipper Billy Watson. And it's interesting because, you know, this is somebody who, and we're going to get into it, whose career life story has really touched the hearts and minds of Canadians from really the 30s till today, and across generations, and across all types of social constructs. It's really, he may be the most impressive person in Canadian professional wrestling history in that aspect of the professional wrestling business.
Hard to argue. There is a reason he's ranked number 1 in Greg Oliver's book.
Yes.
For the top Canadians. But no, I find with Whipper too, a lot of people, like our generation, unless you study it, you don't know who he is. But like, for example, I was just at a flea market looking for newspapers, right? So I find these clippings, and the girl was shocked. I knew who Whipper Billy Watson was. She's like, "What does a young man like you want to know about him?" I'm like, "Well, hold on a second. What do you want to know about him?"
Yeah. Perhaps she didn't know that you had binders and binders upon clippings to further your knowledge. I guess, you know what, that kind of segues us into a little bit of a backstory about yourself and what's happening with the program with yourself and Wes. But more specifically, what drew you into the clipping aspect of professional wrestling history?
So for me, I was just like, I got stuck in the 80s. I didn't know where to go, right? I was like, I know there's wrestling before 1980.
Yes.
Where, like, I needed help. So I reached out to Greg Oliver, and he kind of helped me, and then I met him and kind of took on Ontario Superfan Terry Dart's abundance of loose papers. And he's like, listen, he was a super fan, he passed away, but he wanted to leave that with a fan, and Greg's like, hey, if you want to spend the time and put it together, then... So I feel like I'm kind of completing his work. But it just led to more and more of my knowledge, and probably about almost 3 years solid now of just putting these binders together. I got about 9 or 10 of them, but it really just opened your eyes about the local stuff here, let alone... It's not just Vince, right? It goes beyond Vince McMahon Jr.
Yes. Yeah, I always love seeing on Twitter and on Facebook as well, the pictures of your binders of just the vast array and assortment of materials. And, like, you know, they're all labeled, like, you know, whoever it was, and the years specific too, right? I really enjoy that kind of stuff.
Yeah, the Toronto binders I always have. I have the 50s and 60s Toronto binder, the 70 to 89, 90 to now. And then, you know, Wes will make fun of me, but I don't care. I have the Hulk Hogan binder. I got the Hulk Hogan binder with all the Hulk sort of stuff in it, because, like, It's our era, man.
Yeah.
Like, who wasn't a Hulkamaniac, right?
Yeah, 100%.
So, and the Terry Justice binder is just gold that I have. It's just, oh my god, the stuff you just like, oh wow, he was here this week, and then he was here next week, and we just love to share it, man. So I love it.
Yeah, which I obviously, with my interest in the history side of things, I love seeing it, and I get such a thrill that, it's not just the older generations, and this is something that we'll discuss later on in our conversation tonight, but it's now it's people a little bit older than us, right? Now it's us, and hopefully getting, our kids into it, and obviously that's a conversation we'll have a little bit later, but how this all ties into our conversation tonight is naturally a lot of the information that you would have in some way, shape, or form would be tied in some point to Whipper Billy Watson. Now, for yourself, and you were saying that you're stuck in the 80s, you want to see what else is out there. Was Whipper Watson a name that had come to you before you started the wrestling research?
No, I didn't know who he absolutely was. No, and I'm not afraid to admit it. Like, I didn't know who Whipper was. I didn't know a lot of the guys we'll probably discuss tonight. I didn't know who they were.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't even know who the Sheik was. I thought that was the Iron Sheik that
Yes.
I saw on WWE, right? But it's like, no, silly Jesse, right? Like, and then it just kind of opened up like the Detroit side, and then because I was so focused on Whipper Watson and the Ontario side, then I kind of branched to the borderline, right, and got to the Detroit side. So
Yes.
It's wild, man, what's out there.
So I know that yourself and Wes with the old podcast, the Ontario Wildmen podcast, you guys had done a 2-part episode actually on Whipper Watson, where you guys did what I thought was an excellent job going essentially year over year where he was, what he did, his feuds, all that kind of information. I highly suggest that everybody can go check that out. I'm actually going to put a link to that in the show notes on today's episode so everybody can check that one out. Tonight's going to be a little bit different. We're not really going to get bogged down in the year-to-year, but we're going to give a really good look at some of the more fascinating aspects of what happened. And a lot of the information that I've come across and that you were able to impart in that episode, some of the bigger stories, some of the more fascinating aspects is what we're really going to dial into today. And I think it's going to really shed some light and open some eyes about not just Whipper Watson, the wrestler, but Whipper Watson, the individual, and what he had to go through in terms of trials, tribulations, obviously, the tragic and horrific end to his career. And I guess, in terms of stories that are almost, you wouldn't believe them if they didn't actually happen in history and were provable fact, we got to get into, really early into his wrestling career. Earlier on in the program, we had discussed how he kind of got his start, but what really changed the trajectory of his career was going overseas, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, definitely. That it's funny who went on that trip, right? Like, you had Whipper Watson, and then, Tiger Tasker.
Yes.
I think, right? Al Corman and Tommy Nelson, I think.
Yeah, Tommy Nelson, yeah.
Yeah, right? Like, those 4 guys went over, and it's just wild. You get, like, if you think of 1930, right? And then he's over there wrestling, and then a guy was late coming over, right? So it's like, I don't know, man. It's just so, when you put hindsight on everything now, and really say, like, would he have been the person he was if he didn't go overseas?
Yeah, that's correct.
And
yeah.
that's like that's the benefit of like guys like you and I have, and like people like Wes and Wenning studies, like looking at it on a greater aspect, going, man, imagine he didn't go. Would he be the person he is if he didn't go?
And that's a fascinating way to look at it as well, because not only was, and we'll touch on this in a minute, what happened with the name situation, but the style of wrestling, I think, is really something that he brought back here and really improved upon. And, you know, and we should also frame this in the context of the years that happened. So we're talking 1936. Well, in 2 years, the world's at war, right?
Yeah.
But
Germany invades Poland.
exactly, and even before, the Eastern Europe was already in a bit of turmoil at this point in time, right? So it's not like today where you can hop a plane and go to England and do a tour, right? He's on a boat ride for how long, right? Like you said, the guy who is going to be his namesake originally misses his time, and
the original Whip Watson missed the boat.
Yes, yeah, literally missed the boat, which is in itself just a wild story, right? Because again, Whipper Watson, you don't equate the actual person behind the name almost until you read the story of how he came into possession of that name. So maybe we should touch on that before we get into some of the harder aspects of his time in England.
Oh yeah, it's wild, that he goes there as one name and then he takes on Whipper Watson, right? Or Billy Watson, I should say.
Yeah, it was Billy Watson. Yeah.
Right, he took the name Billy Watson, and then the guy that showed up that was supposed to be Billy Watson, he was like, "Oh, my name's taken," and then he turned into me Pat Flanagan.
Yeah.
So it's like, well, don't tell me everything doesn't happen for a reason, man. Like, but it's kind of significant too. Like you say, 1936, they go overseas, and then he's supposed to be a certain name, and then, oh damn, well, we really booked this guy on the posters.
Yes.
Billy Watson, right? So now you have to be that guy, which is what's common, right? Like,
yeah, there's no Google back in the day or anything like that. Yeah.
I can't pick up my phone and just look this up. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly.
And then it's ironic that the guy who was late turned into another great Pat Flanagan.
Yeah, who in himself is a major player in professional wrestling history as well, which is wild.
Maple Leaf wrestling history too. So it's just thinking of how important that trip was, right? Tiger Tasker, Flanagan, Watson,
and what's interesting too is we hear in today's professional wrestling environment, the British style, right? The mat wrestling, the hard. But back then, it was really still a kind of a shoot style of professional wrestling. And so not only does Whipper Watson, not knowing that at this point in time, but he goes over there, gets a name change, gets a new lease on the professional wrestling, career, and gets hurt right away. I think it was he had fractured ribs like his second or third match over there and missed a bunch of time.
Yeah. Off the top of my head, I'm going to trust you on that because I can't remember, but I don't doubt it because those guys, the mats were so hard.
Yes.
And, I think he was wrestling Olympic wrestlers over there too.
That's correct, yes.
Because he did a little bit of amateur in Toronto, right? So he took that style over there.
Yeah, I believe it was. He had a fractured shoulder and broken ribs, missed 6 months. So not only is he now in a foreign land, he's recovering from injury, and this is back in the day. Yeah, exactly. I was just gonna say, right? It's back in the day where there's no guarantees. If you ain't working, you're not making money.
That's right. If you're not in the ring, then you're not making money. But he turned out okay, I think.
Yeah, I would say so. So, and it's crazy to think as well, right? So he has the injuries, but he was then being booked by a couple of former Olympic gold medalists, actually, who was running the territories over there. And they pushed him as a top-level guy, which really, once he comes back to Canada, really is able to elevate himself at that point in time because, it's one thing to go through the ranks here, through the local scene, make a name for yourself and whatever, but there is a certain level of prestige that I find, and you can trace it back through history of guys that have gone away to another land, another country, another continent, whatever, come back and they're automatically that much bigger of a star. And I feel like that was something that Frank Tunney capitalized on almost immediately when he came back.
Yeah, and to give an example for the modern wrestling fans, Cody Rhodes is a perfect example.
Yes.
Right now. Went to AEW, did his thing, came back to WWE. No offense, he's a bigger star than he was when he left.
Yes, 100%.
So there's a prime example of that. And of course, like, what are you supposed to do? The world's at war, right? All you know how to do is wrestle. So who's in charge? Mr. 27-year-old Frank Tunney in Toronto there. So he got a line. Hey, what did you do? Okay, this is where I was, and this is who I was under. So it worked out.
Which is crazy. I guess we should probably touch on that as well. So just in terms of time frame, he leaves for England in 1936, returns to Canada in 1940. Obviously, right in the middle of all the turmoil. I believe it was in the fall of 1940, because I believe he had his debut at Maple Leaf Gardens in October of that year.
October 3rd, 1940. I'll never forget because my daughter was born October 3rd.
Oh, cool.
So, yeah. So I'm like, I'll never forget. October 3rd, 1940 was his debut in the Gardens.
And he's he's 27, but already has a name for himself from working overseas. And almost immediately he's kind of put into the top tier level. Although there is a bit of controversy that happens around this time as well. And I believe this happens in 1941. Can you expand on what happened there a little bit?
Yeah, so apparently as the story goes, Whipper made a deal with Frank Tunney about getting a title shot, and it didn't really, kind of didn't happen. So he said, well, I'm going to sue for breach of contract because I won this tournament, and you're not going to do it. So he threatened to sue, and they gave him the match, and Whipper was huge. He was, he's from East York, so when you're announcing him, from Toronto in the Maple Leaf Gardens, and you're talking 1940, so Frank Tunney's already been running Maple Leaf Wrestling since 1930.
Yes.
Right? So it's not his first rodeo dealing with wrestlers saying, I'm this guy, right? But he caved, and Whipper got his way, and as they say, the rest is history, right?
But it is interesting that this is almost... I've only ever come across one other instance where somebody has gone to the papers about a situation in professional wrestling in my research for this program. Obviously, this is predating the dirt sheet, or what we would quote as, modern wrestling media. So the one other time is what we covered in the Chief Don Eagle episode, where Fred Kohler essentially told the papers that he was in discussions with, I think it was the FBI and something else about what happened during the Chicago short count screw job between Gorgeous George and Chief Don Eagle. That's one time. This is the second where somebody has gone to the papers to complain about an issue with their situation. The difference being that this time it's the wrestler doing it, which was almost unheard of at that time. Nobody ever used to go, behind the promoter's back, if you will. And I know that it was part of the storyline and everything else, but and kayfabe was obviously a big deal back then. But it's so fascinating to see how almost immediately Whipper starts understanding how to use the media to really further himself as well. Yes, the wrestling matches are great. I think he went 6-0 in his first 6 appearances with Maple Leaf Wrestling. But you really start to get the sense of really the media savviness that he would expand upon later in life. And this was a really interesting way to kind of kickstart that part of his career.
It's wild that you say that. The Don Eagle thing I didn't know. That was kind of cool to say because I didn't know that. So I'm going to look into that more. Listen to that. The Chicago screw job. I'm trying to think. I thought there was one more that went to the papers. I thought it was with the Gold Dust Trio. way in the early days.
You know what? You may be right. Maybe I need to further research that part of it.
Yeah, I think because I just recently read that the history graphic novel you can get on Amazon or whatever.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, and I thought that he went to the papers, but I'm always unsure. Like I said, I'm just in the 50s. I'm getting to like deep now and trying to get into the 30s, so it's hard.
And
it's 2022. If I have fun finding
yeah, exactly. Well, before we get into the 50s, we should stay in the 40s and really talk about the ascent of Whipper Watson during the championship runs. And I guess it would have been his first title run when he defeated Nanjo Singh, I believe, for the British Empire title. That was April 1942, if I'm correct.
Mm-hmm. Nanjo Singh. Lots you can say about the rival between Whipper and Nanjo.
Yeah, lots you could say about the person as well, but let's touch on the rivalry quick before we get into anything else.
The biggest thing for me between that rivalry is the first cage match in 1945. And the only reason that Frank Tunney invented the ramp was to help Nanjo Singh get out of there. That's how much heat he had.
Which is interesting because prior to that, and I may be wrong, but that was, I believe, the first quote-unquote cage match in professional wrestling history. And that was also the first time a ramp was used in professional wrestling history.
Sorry, a what?
And that was also the first time a ramp was used, I believe, in professional wrestling history.
A ramp?
Ramp.
Yes. It's one of the most famous things for us in Ontario. The ramp, from what I've been told, it was only in Maple Leaf Gardens, right?
Yes.
And with Maple Leaf Wrestling and stuff like that, because even on TV you don't see ramps until Vince McMahon put up this huge production. But even still in his early days, he didn't have a big ramp
That's
or
right.
anything like that. So it wouldn't be wrong to say that, I guess, in history.
And it's, now it's so commonplace, but I can even think back to, the 90s, right? They still had a lot of the walkout just on the floor, right? You look at some of the old,
Monday Night Raws.
Exactly, yeah, and they're just coming out from the curtain, right? It's still very, very old school that way, but yeah, just a great little tidbit of history, and obviously something that is going to draw us back into Maple Leaf Gardens. But here's two guys who, Whipper Watson, a big time fan favorite. Again, he's all over the media. He's a big star. He's being pushed as such. Nanjo Singh is really like the exact polar opposite. This guy is a brutal wrestler. He's evil. He's maniacal. They just have absolute wars with each other.
Yeah, and I want let's put a little bit of perspective on this. You're talking about a guy that's from East York. He's a hometown boy. Kayfabe is 100% in effect.
Yes.
When Nanjo Singh is saying to the reporters, I'm going to make Whipper Watson scream for his life, people are like, yo, this guy is legit. Like, he's going to... You can't talk like that about this guy.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So, and like you said, there's no social media, there's no internet. The papers were the big deal. Everyone would buy the paper. They would see Whipper Billy Watson versus Nanjo Singh, right? This Sunday, or Thursday, I should say, because it's the 40s. This Thursday at Maple Leaf Gardens, right? And then, it's just, for years, like you talked 1942, and then we mentioned the cage match in 1945, so there's 3 years of just battles.
That's right.
And not to mention, Nanjo Singh. Think of the timeline with a name like Singh during a World War II.
Yeah.
Yeah. We always say it on our show, we don't want to sound politically incorrect, but at the same time, you have to put perspective on the time.
Yes.
So, the newspapers, like you said, with the media, is wild too. And then with Nanjo, and then that led to even more rivals because, sometimes you gotta learn a new hold. And
Well, yeah, but
Nanjo Singh was-
Nanjo Singh learned a new hold, but in a little bit different context than we would normally see in professional wrestling. And I suppose now is probably a good time as any to kind of bring this aspect up. And if you're listening to this, you can go that which predates this episode is a little information piece, if you will, about Nanjo Singh. So if you're listening to this episode and you haven't listened to the piece about Nanjo Singh, you should probably put this one on pause. Go listen to that one. It's about half an hour, and it'll really set you up for what we're going to discuss now. Because I don't want to get too deep into the weeds, but we should bring up the fact that not only was Nanjo Singh brutal in the ring, but he was also a murderer in real life. And there's, boy oh boy, that story of Frank Tunney essentially getting him out of the big house right back into the wrestling ring to face Whipper Watson that's something that we got to discuss here real quick.
I guess money talks, right? 1940, people want to see Whipper Watson in a ring. People are paying $1, right, to go see him or whatever it was back then. And then you need a bad guy. It's good guy versus bad guy. Well, who's more bad than a murderer?
Yeah, which
right?
things that would never fly today. But
smoke bombs. Like Nanjo Singh used to hide under the ring, and fans used to throw smoke bombs.
That's
under the
right.
ring,
I
So
totally
it's
forgot about that.
That's a huge reason the ramp was invented, because he kept getting stuck under the ring because the fans were so ruthless.
Which is, again, right? Like just the wild aspect of what it was back. Like wrestling really was the Wild West back then.
Oh my God! Like they had no barrier. The fans are sitting front row, right?
Yeah.
And you ask anybody who saw the Sheik what happened to you if you ran up on him.
Oh
right?
yeah,
So,
exactly. Yeah.
But now it's like you got the hometown hero facing this guy, and the papers probably said something. I've never found anything saying that Frank Tunney hires a murderer to face Whipper Watson or anything, but I mean, you gotta figure that Toronto was all over that in the papers, and who's gonna go see it, right? Like,
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, I'll see it. I'll see Whipper teach him a lesson.
Yeah.
Right?
I guess, and another aspect in, how do you ever, segue from a murder to the rest of the conversation, but we're going to try here. Another aspect of the Whipper Watson story with Maple Leaf Wrestling is when he gets, well, I guess this is a proper segue, when he gets cut into the business of Maple Leaf Wrestling.
Yes.
What were you able to gather during your research? Because I'll be honest, there's a lot of the financial side with the Tunneys. It's hard to find, and it almost seems like unless you know somebody really related to the family or somebody who knows the information firsthand, even today in 2022, it's a lot of conjecture. What were you able to find about Whipper Watson getting cut into the business of Maple Leaf Wrestling?
So, I don't know when he got cut into the Maple Leaf Wrestling side, but I know when Sam Muchnick took over the NWA, Frank Tunney and Whipper Watson kind of had a share of that NWA, right? So you figure that they would team up. He's his moneymaker. So for modern fans, I always do this. So for modern fans, this was Vince McMahon we're talking about. This would be John Cena. It's the cash cow.
Yes.
Right? So you have Frank Tunney and Whipper, and they teamed up, but I think I would have to guess late 40s, because they were buying into the NWA together when Sam Muchnick took over.
That's right. And
that's
sorry, go
a
ahead.
huge thing too.
So
He had his own territory, but it didn't last.
yeah, it didn't last very long. Now it's so. Would you know that? So okay, I guess we should also preface this with that they also bought into the St. Louis territory. So would you know which came first? Did they buy into the St. Louis territory together, and then Whipper got a cut of Maple Leaf?
I would probably think it'd be the Maple Leaf first, and then the
And then
St.
together
Louis
okay,
after.
yeah.
Yeah, because it'd probably be easier going to the St. Louis office. You know how close Frank Tunney and Sam were.
Yes.
And then, so there's probably went that. I would have to assume it went that way. You know what I mean? After the beating Nanjo and all the money they made, and then, hey, let's team up and NWA, let's buy into that, and there's more we could talk about that and controversy, I believe, in my own theories, but
maybe we'll have to touch on that in a second too.
yes, I'm trying to hold off on that one. You know where I'm going on that, but
so I get another big thing that happens in the late 40s, obviously when Whipper beats Fez for the title in St. Louis, and I guess that's really what kind of leads to him, purchasing a part of St. Louis, because that essentially ended up being his home away from home, and they were drawing, 10,000 plus each and every single time that Whipper Watson was down there. It really was, he almost became their like out of town, hometown hero, if you will. It was really, really an interesting story there.
Yeah, huge. He was a massive name in St. Louis. I mean, even Jim Cornette talks about Whipper Watson and Bill Longston, I think his name was.
Yes. Back
in the 40s, right? And they drew one of the biggest houses in St. Louis, and it wasn't even televised.
That's correct, too. And almost no promotion.
Exactly. So imagine that, just showing up and be like, 20,000 people showed up here tonight. You know what I mean? And it's just amazing to see, like, the power, the drawing ability, right? With a guy like Watson and Frank Tunney behind him, right? Like, everybody has somebody back then.
Yes.
Every promoter had somebody, right? Even later on, after the 40s, you could say Vince McMahon Sr. had Andre the Giant. You know what I mean? It's the same kind of concept. So,
which is crazy. You're talking about drawing power. That term is thrown around so loosely today, and I feel like a lot of people have kind of lost the plot on what that means. But when you're looking at a guy like Whipper Watson, who's drawing night after night after night, whatever that arena holds, he's packing them in, and it doesn't matter if it's St. Louis, doesn't matter if he's in Detroit, doesn't matter if he's in Toronto, it doesn't matter if he's in Montreal. There's a lot of runs out there, right? Everywhere that he's going, he's top of the bill. He's drawing the crowds, right? So and that whole his circuits were wild. I think at one point he was almost going 7 days a week.
Yeah, I have clippings of him in Oshawa, Ontario, which is my hometown. And it goes all the way back to the 40s. And you got to think, back then, you weren't for a long time you weren't allowed to do anything on Sundays in Toronto.
Yeah,
it's just one of those laws, right? So if you're going Monday, you're in like St. Louis. You fly back on Tuesday, you're in Oshawa. On Wednesday, you could be in London, Ontario.
Yes.
And then on Thursday, you're in Toronto Maple Leaf Gardens, right? Oh, it's Friday. Off to St. Louis, right, to do the NWA weekend. It could just easily just be just that, and he would have made a fortune. But he went everywhere, like, because he was a traveling champion. Like, he didn't care. He loved doing what he was doing. And it's funny to think, by 1945, he was already probably, I would say, 15 years in. Because he started around 1930 training. Because if he went to the UK in 36, you think 6 years prior to that he was probably training or whatever.
Yeah.
And then you go over there, so it's not like it took him that long just to be able to have that, and that never left. The drawing ability never left, and that's what amazes me about Whipper Watson. The drawing ability, like you said, which does get lost. Like, you don't see Austin Rock draws anymore.
Yeah,
right?
You don't see anything like now.
Right?
It almost seems like it's now it's the company that'll draw, and that's been my view on it for a long time here. Now, like, when you're going to Monday Night Raw, or you're going to a pay-per-view or whatever, you're going to the WWE. You're not going to see blank, insert name here, you're going to see the show, right? Whereas back in the day, even up till, the 90s, really, you were going to that event to see this person. You want to see your guy, right? And there's, 10,000, 15,000 fans who Whipper Watson was their guy, right? And you look at numbers, we're talking like late 40s, 10,000 plus in every place that he goes, essentially, that's able to hold that many fans, right? You even move into the 50s, and he's, drawing 15,000 now, and because they got to move to bigger arenas, right? Like one, for example, I think it was 56 when he ended Thesz's 6-year reign with the title.
Yeah, March 15th.
Yeah, and so they're like, and there's again 15,000 fans because they had to find a bigger arena, right? You'll hear guys like Cornette and whatever, they talk about, a match that needed a stadium or a stadium that needed a match. Well, that was a match that needed a stadium, and like as big as they could get, essentially, at that point in time.
Oh yeah, I mean, you bring up Thez too, right? Like, look at the name there, Lou Thez. Everybody who studies the wrestling history side knows who Lou Thez is, I would hope. And then you're talking one of Canada's biggest draws. And then you're putting them in Maple Leaf Gardens against Lou Thez in 56.
Yeah. Which is wild. And not only that,
talk
right?
Talk about needing a time machine, bro.
Well, exactly. But not only that, you look down the list of some of the names that he was wrestling in the 50s, right? You got, Gorgeous George, and there's a lot about Gorgeous George. Obviously, anybody who hasn't listened to the Chief Don Eagle episode, I would, again, go back and listen to that in the archives. But, Pat O'Connor, there's Dick Hutton, Hans Schmidt, Kowalski's one who comes across that time. Buddy Rogers, although he's kind of in the twilight at that point in time. But
Von Erich.
Yes, exactly. And just the hits keep on coming. And there's one other Canadian professional wrestler that he has a hell of a feud from, and this one essentially goes from the 50s into the 60s. We got to talk about his legendary feuds with Canada's greatest athlete, Gene Kiniski.
Oh yeah, you say to the 60s, you can really count that all the way up to the Canadian Heavyweight Championship tournament.
That's
Toronto,
right. Yeah.
Where Gene Kiniski was in the finals against Dino Bravo.
That's
and
right
Whipper
too.
Watson
Yes.
was there.
Yeah.
And they were going at it. They were pointing at each other. And I think I got an article somewhere about that, or clippings showing that. But yeah, I mean, here's another guy. I always say Canada is fun. Everybody has somebody. Ontario had Whipper Watson. Well, BC had Gene Kiniski.
Yes.
That's their hero. And he supported the Canadian jacket and everything, but he was a bad guy, and these guys went everywhere. I think me and Wes calculated, I think in 1 year alone, they had 89 matches.
That's incredible.
In 1 year, they had 89 matches. So it's like, well, there's only 52 weeks of the year. So do the math. They're probably going two times a week at least.
Yeah, a week for the whole year.
Like, that's insane. But that's how they did it back then. It's a little schedule, right? It's not this is how we hit on a house show. This is how we hit on pay-per-view. It's, no, this is how we go every night.
Yes.
Right? And I mean, Gene Kiniski too. He even in the tag division against Gene Kiniski, like I'm pretty sure he teamed with Johnny Valentine.
That's right.
Against,
yes.
Right, and he went against Whipper Watson in another beat like Bobo Brazil, or in the early '60s Bruno Sammartino and Whipper Watson, who I still think is probably the biggest babyface tag team of the '60s, even though it only lasted a short amount of time.
But that was when he was on the outs with Vince, I think, right? Vince Senior.
Yeah.
That's right.
This is before he went back.
Yeah.
So he went back to Tunney, was working, and then after that he went back, and we all know what happened there.
But let's stop and think about this one for a second. You have arguably the biggest babyface Canadian wrestler possibly in history. You could certainly debate it.
At this point in time, definitely.
At that point in time, 100%. Then you have the biggest babyface American wrestler, because Bruno ruled the Northeast. Like, there's nobody close. Those guys as a tag team is crazy.
Yeah, they had a huge rival with Bulldog Brower and Johnny Valentine.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, I have clippings of that like everywhere. London, Oshawa, I think Whitby. I have one in Whitby. But yeah, they did the whole Ontario circuit. Those guys. And Johnny Valentine didn't play, man. Like every night he went hard.
Yeah, he was working.
Night.
Yeah.
So imagine those battles. A young Bruno Sammartino, we're talking like 26, 27, before his big heyday, teaming with like the biggest star in Canada against any villains, the Kalmakoffs, anybody.
Yeah.
It's just, it's babyface overload.
Now, before Whipper Watson's career ended due to injury, something that we're going to talk about in a minute, it almost ended due to politics.
Yeah.
We should probably expand on that a little bit. So we got to talk about what happened when he ran for the PC party. Was the story that if he was elected, he would have quit wrestling right then and there?
I think that's what the story was, right? I know he ran for the Conservative Party, and it's so funny because when me and Wes did our episode on Whipper Watson, I did a tally, and I was asking people, like, certain of the appropriate age, like, hey, do you know Whipper Billy Watson? And it was only two answers. Yeah, the wrestler, or yeah, the politician. So, you know what I mean? So, but, you know, politics is huge, and TV coverage, and news coverage, and you got to think the popularity, right, of the name Whipper Watson, right? Like, oh, the wrestler's running for office around here. The wrestler,
yes.
like, it's like going into the hometown restaurant and them just fronting you the bill, right?
Yeah.
Like, no problem. But he lost. You know, he didn't win. He lost by, I think, 3,000 votes.
Yes.
If my mind serves me correctly.
So it's wild because he's, this is 1965, in the federal election. He lost by 2,500, give or take a couple. But it's wild that, it could have ended there. It would have ended on quite the high note because, he's still a big drawing power at that point in time. Actually, he had a bit of a career resurgence at that point in time. But, it doesn't end there. He moves on a little bit, and then we kind of move into the 70s, and this is, at the time he's at the tail end of his career, but man, the way that his career ends is really something tragic and really something that's not been reported properly on, I feel like, in terms of wrestling history. What can you tell me about what happened with his career-ending accident?
Well, before his accident, I want to touch on just one thing. The 30th anniversary of Maple Leaf Wrestling.
Oh, of course. Yes, please.
Yes. So the 30th anniversary of Maple Leaf Wrestling. I consider the passing of the torch because Toronto was full swing into the Sheik and Whipper Watson versus the Sheik. I think it drew 18,000 people.
Yes, that's correct.
Right, and it packed the gardens. So at least I'm very happy that he got that moment of like a huge. Like he had a lot of moments, but think about that: 1971, the Sheik, the most hated man on the planet.
Yes.
Taking on our hometown boy, and then it's funny too because I bring up the rival with Bulldog Brower, and Whipper, just like Gene Kiniski, Bulldog Brower played a huge rival in Whipper Watson's career. So for Bulldog Brower to have the final tag match with him. That's kind of
That's
cool.
pretty cool.
It really
yes.
was like a big. Let's take a big look at the whole picture here. You rival with this guy your whole career, and then the last little couple years you tag, and then you have your final match with this guy. So things came full circle. About the accident, it's funny. I have something, I think, from the Toronto Sun in '71. Yeah, right here. I can read it for you if you'd like.
Yeah, please.
I knew we were going to talk about it. So I'll show you first. This is from the Spectator, December 7th, 1971, from a Hamilton newspaper. So I'll show you first.
Yes.
Right? So yeah, before I even read anything, the accident, he got hit, from what I've been told, he got hit by a drunk driver. He was loading a fireplace into his trunk, and on a winter night, and a drunk driver kind of just swerved or lost control, and
he
he
smoked
broke
him.
his leg, like mangled his leg. He went to St. Mike's Hospital in Toronto. St. Mike's to this day is the trauma center of Ontario. I don't know if anybody knew that, but yeah, it is. Funny enough, I did work in St. Mike's on the same floor he was on at one point in time, so that's kind of wild too. But yeah, the accident, it could have been looked at two ways. Like, yeah, it's a tragedy that we lost this guy wrestling, but it also opened up a whole other humanitarian side for him. So the hospital trip kind of like ended one part of his life, but opened up a whole new other side of his life that he devoted it to. So
yes, and this is, something that we're going to be touching on a little bit later on in the program with your tag team partner, if you will, but I don't want to get too ahead of ourselves right now. But it's interesting, in terms of something that I brought up earlier in the program, right? How, he gets into wrestling, then he gets, the media savviness, and that really translates into his, the later career and his philanthropical work. I think even you had trouble with saying that word when you guys had your program as well, which is, there are guys in wrestling where, they retire, they're broke, busted, and done, right? And they have nothing to show for it. Then you have a guy like Whipper who made, piles of money, easily could have retired or rested on his laurels and just gone and done whatever, but instead goes into really devoting his life to charity at that point in time.
yeah, it's crazy too, because I just looked down here while you're talking. It says Watson at 55. So the guy was 55 years old wrestling still. Let's put perspective on that for a second.
Yeah.
And then, he gets hit, and it says his left leg was mangled and encased in a cast from toe to groin. More than 3 hours of surgeries were needed. So, I mean, you're talking, he wasn't a small guy,
Yeah.
That's a big cast. But, yeah, man, I don't know. It's weird when you really, like I said, when everybody gets to hindsight of 2020 being on our side and looking at everything. I don't want to dabble too much because I don't want to get Wes upset. He may just get a super kick because you know how much he loves Shawn Michaels.
Oh, yes. So I guess, as we start to wrap up this portion of the conversation tonight, in terms of your research with Whipper Watson, was there anything that really stood out to you as something that we haven't covered, or maybe something that we have covered tonight? Something that really stood out to you as I can't believe this is actually something that has happened, or I can't believe this guy actually did blank.
I mean, it's kind of cool that you have, when you look back on the ramps thing, like we talked about earlier tonight, and how anybody who faced Whipper Watson was that hated. They had to hide under the ring or need a ramp to elevate them off the ground to get them out of it.
Get them away.
And you look back at the names too. Bulldog Brower, Johnny Valentine, Gene Kiniski, Dick Hutton, you said. A name that we didn't mention, Elio DiPaolo.
Yes.
A huge tag partner for him in the 50s. And I think some of the 60s, but, it's just, is he the best of all time? Well, I'm a little biased with Bret Hart, but different times, different stages, different productions, But, yeah, I'm just happy that I got to come out and talk about Whipper, man. Anytime to talk about the whip, I'm down. So.
And I guess, before I really let you go for the night tonight, there was one question I had to ask because we're very similar in age. I think you're 88 or 87, I think, something like that, right?
Yeah,
88, yeah. Okay, so there you are. So, I'm 37. Actually, well, I'll be 37 by the time everybody hears this program. But, I'm not sure how it is for you looking back in history, but for myself, it's so fascinating to see these people kind of speak through the years, almost jump off the page of what you're reading. And I get so captivated and enthralled with what they've done with their careers, with their lives, with their personalities. It's captivating. I'm not sure with yourself in your research, what draws you into it? What makes you want to keep several binders of material?
Hey, you know what? I'm a big. There's a couple things I love about doing the research. I'm sure you have your little thing. Everybody has their niche, but I love family trees.
Yes.
Right. So I love seeing everybody who's related. Not because you never know, right? Because kayfabe was full on effect. So yeah, Abdullah Butcher was from Windsor, guys. He's not the madman from Sudan.
Yeah.
He's about a 6-hour drive from my house. But yeah, even when you dig deep, you say the names jump off the page. It's true. One name that jumps off the page for me all the time is Hard-Boiled Haggerty. And
yes.
There's another name that Whipper fought, right? And the times, and you say, these guys were wrestlers. They showed up, right? They signed. They played the part, but kayfabe was in effect, so the fandom, if you go on the Maple Leaf Wrestling Archives on YouTube, there's footage of Whipper Watson wrestling, right? And you just see the fans go nuts.
Yeah.
Right? And it's just a different time, right? And we talk about the drawing ability. Will we see that ever again?
Yeah, it's hard to say. Yeah.
Or is it just now a show again? Right? I don't go see a movie. I go to Cineplex to see a movie, right? I go to WWE to see the show.
I think that's
right?
a great analogy.
So, yeah, right? So, the analogy that you gave me earlier, when you said it, you're like, yeah, you really just go see the product. And I'm like, well, damn, I've never really looked at it like that before. And it's kind of true.
Yeah.
Right? But, and will there be guys like Whipper Watson, Yvonne Robert, Stu Hart, Gene Kiniski? Are there going to be guys from Canada that are going to be that significant and make that much of an impact? Right? Because would we have the people we have today without Whipper Watson?
Yeah, exactly.
Right? How many wrestlers actually know who Whipper Watson is?
Well, hopefully quite a bit more after listening to this program.
Yeah, hopefully. So, it's, yeah, man, but regardless, I had a good time talking. I'm really impressed with the research you done and really happy that you invited me out. And, Wes is still upset that the Leafs suck and blow it, but at least his boy, at least Matthews won the Leafs something in June,
yeah.
Right? So.
All right, Jesse, man, this is an absolute blast. Thank you so much. I'm going to have you on again, and I look forward to seeing what else you guys come up with on the Facebook groups and on Twitter as well.
Yeah, man. Looking forward to it. Anytime you want to have me out, let's do it. I'm down.
Now, to further dig into Whipper Billy Watson, not just the wrestler, but also the man, and especially into the philanthropic aspect of his life and career, I'm going to bring on the second half of the National Wrestling Clipping Alliance podcast duo, or tag team, if you will, Wes. Now, Wes was an absolute treat to talk to, and actually he now lives about 30 minutes north of me, so I can call him the northerner, if you will. But Wes is going to come on the program. He's going to talk a lot about the personal side of Whipper Billy Watson, and we get into a lot of conversation about what Whipper meant to the philanthropic community in Ontario. And it's really an eye-opening conversation, in my opinion, because, you know, you can read stuff on paper. You can read, well, not that many people read stuff on paper nowadays, per se, but you can read stuff online. You can read stuff via Twitter or on Facebook or whatever. But when you're having the conversation and you start really understanding the scope of certain things, it's really, really fascinating, and just gives a much deeper appreciation, if you will, about Whipper Watson and what he meant to Ontario as a whole, and then naturally Canada on the bigger picture of that as well. But before we get there, there was one part of the conversation that I had previous to this regarding Kiniski, because as many folks will know, we did the fantastic deep dive episode last season on Gene Kiniski. We had author Stephen Verrier and the man behind MapleLeafWrestling.com, guest from last month, AC. And on that program, obviously Whipper Watson was a large part of our conversation as well. AC brought the Maple Leaf Wrestling side of it. Steve Verrier brought the really the bigger picture aspect of it. And we were kind of talking between Jess and Wes about, you know, how many matches, because it seemed like, you know, a ton of matches between Whipper and Kiniski. So I went ahead and tracked down and figured out exactly how many matches the two of them had combined. So that would be singles matches with each other, tag matches against each other, and handicap matches against each other. Now, the number that we had thought was 80, but the number that I actually came across is Whipper Billy Watson squared off against Gene Kiniski on the outside of the ring, either in singles, handicap, or tag matches, a total of 132 times. So think about that for a second. Whipper Watson, who, by the way, in my estimate, had a career match total of just over 1,500 matches. 134 of those matches were strictly against Gene Kiniski. And, you know, almost more impressive than that is you look at his last match against Kiniski was in 1967. His first recorded match, at least, against Gene Kiniski was in 1957. So you're looking at like a 10-year period, just over 130 times. It's pretty impressive stuff. And you can tell, you know, that also goes back to the portion that I read from Slam Wrestling from Greg Oliver earlier, where Kiniski was just raving about the type of individual, I should say, that Whipper Billy Watson was. And you can tell from the quote, the admiration that he being Kiniski, had for Whipper Watson. And my goodness, the proof is in the pudding. You can't have that many matches against somebody, and they're all over North America as well, which is even more wild in my opinion. But just an unbelievable stat that jumped off the page, and And I just wanted to make sure that made air. Sometimes I get so much information and there's so much backstory these programs are, for the most part, so long that sometimes something slips through the cracks and I don't mean it to. Like last month when I went to bring up the fact that Angelo Mosca had some incredible matches with Abdullah the Butcher in Japan, both teaming with him and against him. And I meant to put it in that episode, and it fell through the cracks, and whatever, just things like that happen. But I wanted to make sure that I put in the Kiniski stuff in here, because I think it's really fitting, and again, draws back to our Kiniski episode from last season of Grappling with Canada. So, I think a perfect way to tie this segment into Wes would be a little in-ring action where we have a little interference ran on Whipper Billy Watson by that dastardly evil Gene Kiniski. So I'm going to play some more classic in-ring audio, and on the other side, my great conversation with Wes. Here we go.
A little treatment from this sleeper, and a man is not too well. And now Watson has the whole family applied. Watson has the whole family applied. But Kiniski comes into the ring and breaks it up. There's big Gene Kiniski came into the ring and broke it up. And there's Watson tearing the coat off Kiniski. There's Watson ripping that coat to pieces of Kiniski. And there's Martin Moscato in there with his men. And they're trying to subdue Kiniski. But Kiniski's gone crazy. And both Kiniski and Eric are attacking Watson. And Martin's men are in there. Martin Moscato has his men. They're all trying to push Kiniski out. And they're all grabbing him. They've taken about 6 men to subdue Kiniski. And Kiniski has lost his shirt, his coat, everything. Everything's ripped off him. Kiniski really took a bad beating then at the hands of all those that tried to subdue him. But he was crazy. And so was his partner. There's his old partner's crazy. Wrestling fans, there's quite a melee going on here. There's quite a melee going on here as everybody's trying to get order. The fans are going crazy. They're finding it hard to restore order here. But Watson has crowned a winner. Rocky Marciano has crowned Whipper Billy Watson the winner of this contest by disqualifying Fritz von Erich. Rocky Marciano has disqualified Fritz von Erich and has declared Whipper Billy Watson, ex-heavyweight champion of the world, present British Empire wrestling champion, the winner. And Watson takes hold of Kiniski, and takes hold of Fritz von Erich by a part of Kiniski's coat and holds him into the corner. He holds him into the corner. Rocky Marciano there took command, disqualified Fritz von Erich in 17 minutes and 11 seconds, and is now raising Watson's hand. Watson the winner in the wildest contest that I have ever witnessed, and certainly probably one of the wildest wrestling contests that has been witnessed at the Battle of War Memorial Auditorium. Marciano sending Fritz von Erich to his dressing room. Rocky Marciano probably had one of the roughest times of his ring career here tonight in restoring order in a contest that got well out of hand for a brief period. And then we find Big Gene Kiniski doing his best to aid his old associate, but failed miserably. And so, wrestling fans, Rocky Marciano crowns Whipper Billy Watson of Toronto, Canada, winner over the big German wrestler Fritz von Erich.
All right, everybody. I'm very happy to be joined on the line right now by the second half of the tag team that we mentioned earlier on in the program, Wes Maidman. Wes, how you doing?
I'm good, Andy. How are you today?
I'm doing fantastic. It's funny because normally a lot of my interviews are all over the map in terms of time zones or times in the world, or maybe it's tomorrow or maybe it's yesterday. But today, somebody who is not far from where I am in Winnipeg, you're just in St. Andrews, which is not far from me. So I'm super happy to have you on the program tonight.
Thank you. It's going to be so much fun. I love talking wrestling history. No doubt about it. My favorite thing. I can go on for hours and hours and days.
Which, it's funny because I'm pretty sure I've listened to you for hours and hours and possibly days with between the current project you're working on, but also the Ontario Wildmen podcast that you were previously associated with. So before we get into tonight's program, do you want to talk a little bit about what the current program is that you're working on?
Sure. We have a podcast on YouTube, on our own YouTube station. It's based on one of our Facebook pages that we have called the National Wrestling Clippings Alliance, and that's a podcast. And the Facebook page is called the same. We also have the Ontario Wrestling Clippings of the past and the Facebook tribute page for the Wildman. And everything started with the Wildman and morphed into the Ontario. And Jesse and I came up with the National Wrestling Clippings Alliance. We turned it into a podcast, like we said, which was on the Dave Dynasty Network, the Ontario Wildmen. And we just decided that we wanted to share more, so we're sharing video and audio on our podcast.
Yeah, which is certainly obviously the big difference between this program and yours is the video portion, which I can appreciate as well, because you know, as cool as it is for me to, you know, sit here and enunciate about all of these, you know, people, places, facts, locations, etc., it's cool that you guys have that actually in video form on the YouTube page.
It's so exciting. I love it. Just to pull out, and we do take things from the internet, I'm not going to lie, but a lot of it's from our personal collections, and the referencing and holding up pictures and, oh, look, this is the picture I took at Toronto State Gardens of Ric Flair entering the ring or something, right? It's just a different slant on things, and so I love it. I love doing it. I could do it for the rest of my life.
What I've always fascinated with on the Facebook group is first off, is the clippings are tremendous, and the pictures that you guys get and the pictures that other people actually send in, because there's a lot of family of wrestlers who are from that area who also are on that group, and they post and whatever. But it's the amount of detail that goes into everything and the explanations, because you can go in the comments section afterwards and read, you know, not only, okay, this happened here, but here's the explanation of what happened and who was involved and all that kind of backstory for people like me. It's absolutely fascinating.
Some of the people we've talked to, I've learned stuff. I post a picture and I'll say, I don't remember who this mask guy was, say, for example. And we've had people come in and say, oh, that was me. I was doing someone a favor. Blah, blah, blah. They needed, Chris Colt broke his arm. They needed a mask guy to Chris Colt to manage. So it's been so exciting to learn also as we go on. So I love sharing, but I believe me, I'm learning too.
And that's what's cool about this, you know, the projects that you guys are doing as well as the one that I'm doing is, you know, I'm not sure how it is for you guys with, you know, the old program versus the new one, but for myself, you know, I spend, oh my God, you know, 20, 30, 40 hours on each episode between, you know, the research, production, whatever. And there's been times where it's like, you know, I'm at, as they say, nut cutting time.
Yep.
And I find something and I have to get it in. And it's like 0 hour, 9 a.m. as the Rocket Man song would go. And yes. I have to like edit my whole program to get this one last thing that I just finally found. It's a never ending process, but to me, it's so rewarding. I'm not sure how you guys feel about this as well.
Jesse tries to, we both try to not put something in each other's eye line for the next upcoming podcast.
Yes.
So there's a bit of surprise somewhere. Sometimes it's just me sticking my finger up my nose. Jesse's talking about NWO or something, and it's like, or something even worse, because I did get the NWO. I mean, it's just I kind of forgot about it, right?
Yes.
But yeah, I'll pull a picture. I've got something coming up for our next episode we're going to take. That's just, I think it was so cool that maybe no one else knows. Oh, look what I found! You know, and
yeah,
it's just great.
Yeah, 100%. I absolutely, yeah, and that part of it comes through when you guys are talking too, because there's always that, you know, aha moment between the two of you, when he provides something that you maybe never heard of before, but when you impart a lot of things that, because, you know, the age range is certainly
massive.
Well, I was gonna say massive, but
it's okay.
I know he likes to get on you about that, but I wasn't gonna go there. But but it's super interesting. But I love that dynamic, and it's so interesting. You know, you both are almost trying to one up each other, which I really appreciate.
And I love how Jesse is soaking it in. We taped one last week. And I looked at him for a millisecond, and he pulled it right out. And I was like, "Wow!"
Yeah.
You know, I'm throwing names at him. He's going, "Oh, wasn't that so and so?" I go, "Yeah, you got it."
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. You know what? History and you know, keeping this stuff alive is kind of what we're all about, and in no more or no way is that more permanent than right now with, you know, talking about Whipper Billy Watson, because here's somebody who was, you know, an incredible star, not just in Toronto, not just in Ontario, but an incredible star for all of Canada. And he's one of these individuals who over time is kind of faded with my generation, because, you know, and I'm speaking about myself, even people younger, maybe people a little bit, you know, a touch older than me, maybe in their 40s, who maybe they heard about Whipper from their parents, but don't understand what he actually meant. And there are a lot of things, and we've discussed some of them on the program previously to this conversation, but there are a lot of things and a lot of times, instances, and events that don't happen in professional wrestling without Whipper Billy Watson. Chief of those is some of the feuds that he had, and some of the most notable feuds that he had throughout his career. And this is something that, you know, I've done a ton of research on, read multiple books and whatever, but you almost don't get a sense of it unless you hear people who have either seen firsthand or had firsthand knowledge from it, and it's pretty impressive. Just the amount of people that were involved and the amount of people who saw it across Canada. It's one of those things that, you know, you almost take for granted, like myself, you know, getting into history yourself as somebody who's saved clippings throughout years, right? We almost take it for granted that, you know, we think that people should know who these people are. And when they don't, when they don't, it's almost like, wait a minute, what do you mean? So this is something that I'm really looking forward to discussing with you, is some of the notable feuds that he had, and these are like massive names in professional wrestling. A lot of people would be very familiar with a lot of them.
Yeah, for sure. We look at. I never saw him wrestle. I saw him wrestle on TV when I was a kid.
Yes.
Because he stopped in 71. So you got to put that into perspective. I'm 63.
Carry the 7, yeah.
my birthday was the other day. Like 63 or 64? 63. So, yeah. 1971 was 50-something years ago.
Yes.
If you were a 23-year-old wrestling fan in when he finished wrestling, you're probably gone by now. My dad saw it with her, but my dad's like 88.
Yeah.
So, and you know, he remembers them, but it's that part of history. He started in like 46 or something, 1946. How long ago was that? 50, 60, 70 years ago, right? and that's no one's here that would have seen him.
Which is crazy because you look at the list of names of some of the big feuds he has, or had. We should use that as a proper phrasing, if you will. But some of the names that he feuded with are like, you name the names and people would know them. And we're going to get into that in a second. But maybe because he's Canadian, and this is something that seems to come across in the majority of episodes that I do, maybe because, Whipper was Canadian, we kind of took him for granted. And, people are so quick to talk about some of the names that we're going to discuss right away, some of the non-Canadian names, more specifically, and, it's like a boom, 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 that you can list them off quickly, and then Whipper is almost sort of, maybe not in that echelon, and I think he should be, and a lot of that is regarding, not only who he wrestled, but the amount of fans that he drew to these matches, and that's something that we're going to get into as well tonight.
Definitely a draw. I mean, he would have never got the big belts if he wasn't a draw. You can say that he owned part of St. Louis here. He had digs in St. Louis. You can say that Fez liked him. There's plenty of reasons why someone would get the belt. But most of the reasons are, especially back in those days, was that they could wrestle, they could defend it, they could protect it, and that they were a draw. They had to be a draw, whether it was in Arizona or Regina.
And I think that's one of the more overlooked portions about Whipper Watson, not so much for the older generation. I don't mean that in a derogatory way, but people my age and a little bit older don't understand, when you were the champ for a reason, right? When you were wearing the NWA strap, you had it for a reason because you were a draw. You could go anywhere and draw the fans. And again, we're going to get into the feuds right away, but it was, there was a certain prestige that went along with the belt that I feel is people don't understand what that is anymore, because there's
I think you missed a word there. I think you said certain prestige. I think you could have said massive prestige.
Yes, you're absolutely correct, and I misspoke. Yes,
not to correct you, but the difference between those two words back in those days was really important.
Yes, you're absolutely correct, and the amount of prestige that these individuals brought to each promotion that they ended up wrestling in is something that would boost up said promotion, right? And it's something that's really lost today. Like, people just don't understand what... Because, I mean, every promotion's got 17 belts, and they're all interchangeable, and nobody's a star anymore, but... back in the day, there was that traveling star who would go and make a territory. He would go and make a challenger. He would go and put the next guy over. Something that Whipper Watson was especially known for, right? Putting guys over. He never had a problem with it. And that's something that, obviously we can discuss later on, but, you don't see that nowadays anymore. It's not... Whether it's because we don't have territories or whether it's because we're just not in that frame of mind, I guess, it's very interesting.
It's just a show now.
Yes.
And it's not a exhibition of strength and science.
Yes, I agree. Yeah.
And I get it. I have no problem with going and seeing shows. I like pay my $20 and get in and watch, be entertained like a movie, or a play, or the opera, or whatever. We can't even put it into perspective what it would be like to go to St. Louis in 1953 and see Pat O'Connor and Whipper Billy Watson wrestle in the main event for the National Wrestling. They had tables that were covered in linen. They were all around the ring. These people, everyone anywhere near the ringside was tuxedoed up. The women all had evening dresses on. It's like the photos that you see from hockey games from the 50s.
Yeah.
All the men are in suit and ties and hats in the arena.
Yeah.
The perfect example of how life has changed.
And I guess, Pat O'Connor is a good one to bring up as well, because you could even say that Pat O'Connor is not even one of the biggest rivals that he ever had in his whole career, not just with the NWA title, but just in generally speaking. And he had such big feuds and big moments that it's almost laughable when you look at the list of people who he's wrestled. And so, maybe we should start with Bill Longston, because, here's someone who many wrestling fans, like many wrestling historians, would be very familiar with.
Yes.
In America specifically, but, a lot of Canadians would be familiar with him as well. So let's talk a little bit about Whipper's feuds with Bill Longston and what that meant for Whipper at the time.
I think it was important because of the star quality of Longston in St. Louis, in Missouri. Like O'Connor after basically settled in St. Louis, as many guys did.
Yes.
When you're that big of a star somewhere, like you said, eventually someone has to get put over. And Bill Longston goes a year without being defeated in St. Louis, captures the belt, and then defends it for, I do have it there somewhere, but and then along comes Whipper, who is completely babyface for Longston's wild guy. Not necessarily wild guy, but mean guy.
Yes.
Let's put it that way, I guess, right? And they have to have good and bad, but on the same note, they have to have someone who's going to be a big draw. So maybe Longston couldn't draw in California or Texas, probably in Texas, but Florida, say.
Yes.
Where Whipper maybe wasn't as big of a draw in California because he didn't go there very often. He wasn't a big name there, but he still had to produce. Sorry, I completely lost the wild Bill Longston there.
That's okay.
But yes, he did beat him, and a big feud in St. Louis.
Which is wild, we've heard, throughout the course of this program and all the individuals that I've covered, right? You'll hear, the Toronto-Detroit connection. You hear Toronto-Montreal, obviously, massive connection there. But Toronto to St. Louis was an interesting dynamic, and it seems to have really started around that Whipper-Watson era and kind of continued from, the 40s until mid-70s, maybe early 80s is when that connection really started to fizzle out. And maybe you could draw a line between St. Louis and Toronto with Whipper-Watson almost at that point.
You could, because Whipper was successful and he had money. Him and Tunney invested to a certain extent in St. Louis. Tunney being former NWA president at the time during Whipper's run. So we can see the connection by Tunney and Whipper, and seeing the dynamic of how Muchnick ran NWA St. Louis and Toronto ran with Tunney. They were pretty much the same. Big arenas, big territories, and both areas needed a big bad guy and a big good guy.
Yes.
More. I think they needed more a massive big guy, and Tunney was it. Watson was it.
Yes.
Here.
Which is interesting because then you look at somebody like Yvon Robert from Montreal, which is, I know we're skipping over somebody, but there's a reason I'm skipping over him right now. But it's an interesting dynamic almost, you're playing off the French and the English at that point, right, between both territories. You're playing, it's like the Canadiens and the Maple Leafs, right? It's the whole feud which still exists today.
Yep.
And, it's interesting to go from the dynamic, the feud with Longston to the feud with Robert is just as hot, but it's hot for different reasons, if you will.
Yeah, because when they wrestled in Ottawa, they probably went to a draw. When they wrestled in Toronto, Whipper won. Yvon Robert was maybe more of a tweener.
Yes.
When they went to Montreal, they reversed. They had to. I've seen some matches with Whipper in the ring, and you can see that tiny little bit of, I'm going to say, not shithead, but a bit of a, you can see he's got that, he could be a heel if he wanted to be.
Yes.
There's a few times when he grabbed guys by the hair and he threw them right over the top rope.
Yeah.
So it's not like he couldn't do it.
But it's interesting, you know, we always look, and maybe this is a faux pas, if you will, but us in Western Canada, we always looked at Whipper Watson as like the clean cut, the Canadian baby face, the ultimate baby face, right? It's interesting to see him go into Montreal and kind of play upon that heel persona, if you will, a little bit, which is interesting. Again, maybe that's the Western Canadian bias working a little bit.
But you got to look at too, because one of the other big names we haven't mentioned yet was basically a Western Canadian person, and they wrestled against each other like 750,000 times.
Yeah,
right?
we're gonna get to him in a second. I guess there are two huge names that we're gonna discuss, but before we get into those ones, Gorgeous George was another one that I found interesting because, to be honest, I didn't really know that Whipper Watson and Gorgeous George had any kind of feud, which was interesting because there was another Canadian wrestling star who I covered a few months ago, Don Eagle, who had a very sordid happenstance, if you will, with Gorgeous George. But I was wondering, what were you able to ascertain about the matches between Whipper Watson and Gorgeous George?
I was a fan of Gorgeous George. I would never knock him. He could wrestle. He could do his thing. His personality, his aura, his charisma. I think that it was by the time they were wrestling in the 50s, especially in Toronto, although I know they went to a certain degree across Canada.
Yes.
That it was money.
At that point.
He was going to make money, and George was going to make his money no matter what. And you know, they were getting close, especially George was getting closer to the end, had no problem getting his hair shaved off, right?
Yes. Yeah, and that was one of the big drawing matches too, right? Was the hair versus hair?
It was
oh no, sorry, it was
title versus hair or something.
That's
like
right,
that.
yeah, title versus hair, you're absolutely correct.
George didn't get shaved, but his valet got shaved.
That's right.
Whipper wouldn't cut all her hair off because he's such a great guy. Right?
What an absolute gentleman, eh?
and I've heard from people that some people said that he wasn't a perfect gentleman, and maybe that was the aura that the faces had back then. They were always bothered, right?
Yes.
So maybe a few people in their lifetime bothered him at the wrong time, and he told them to get lost or something.
Yeah.
So other than that, his persona was, like you said, squeaky clean, man.
Yeah. He was Mr. Clean without the merchandising, if you will.
Well, he did pretty good at the merchandising.
Well, that too. Yeah. Maybe I shouldn't say that part.
Without the massive advertising campaign behind it.
That's true. Yes, absolutely correct. Now, and another one who is like, you know, some of the names we just listed, you know, Bill Longston, Yvon Robert, Gorgeous George. One person who does not fit this mold, if you will, is the Sheik out of Detroit. Now, this was later in Whipper Watson's career, if I'm correct, when he started feuding with, yes. So, how did that work between the Sheik and Whipper, and was Whipper very involved with the Detroit scene at that time as well?
Off and on through the 60s, he worked Detroit. I think when he was homesteading, especially in the summertime, Tunney had a fantastic summertime circuit in Ontario. Whipper would main event the bigger houses around Southern Ontario, the cottage country and stuff. And I think during a few off days a week or a month, he would work Detroit. Off and on, right through the 60s, there was a rapport there. I'm sure, I can't say, I'm sure the Sheik respected him for what he was and who he was. The few matches that they had in Toronto, again, just money. I remember seeing a picture of Whipper in a magazine, maybe 1971 or something like that. And there was a picture of him in Toronto in a tag team against the Love Brothers. And you know, truth be known, he was fat. He was old. He was fat. He'd already been in the ring for 34 years, 35 years.
Yes.
He wasn't taking any bumps, let's put it that way. So, you know, looking at some of the Sheik stuff that people have said, I completely disagree with most of it, because Sheik was a show. It was his entrance. It was his match. It was after the match.
Yes.
It wasn't just the 4 minutes that was recorded that the match was. So Whipper was getting in there for 5-10 minutes, maybe a little bit of a nick, and they collected their pay.
Yeah.
And the fans came out. The fans would have packed it.
Yes. That's such a fascinating point that you bring up, because this is, you know, I had done an episode on Abdullah the Butcher last year, and here's another one where it's, you know, people will talk about, oh, you know, maybe the match wasn't great, but they seem to omit the build and they omit the aftermath, right? It's almost like people are so focused on what happens bell to bell that they forget what happened before, what happened after. And really, you know, back in the day, which is something that we've lost today, and we could go on and on for hours, I'm sure, about how, you know, nobody gets talked into a building anymore, but, you know, guys like the Sheik, Abdullah, Whipper Watson, right, you're talked into the building. The match is almost irrelevant at that point. It's the fact that these two guys have built up this match, this stipulation, this whatever you want to say. You want to see what's going to happen, right? They've talked you in. Once you're in, it doesn't matter almost at that point. It's the fact that they've gone out of the way to bring you into the building, make you feel a part of it.
Those are excellent words. Feel a part of it. Who wouldn't want to pay their $5 back in the 70s or $25 now and be part of the show?
Yeah, exactly.
Whether a heel comes over to you and gives you the, you know, swearing at you or gabbing at you or flips your hat off or something. I know that's verboten, but it happened in Winnipeg at the show we were at just a month or so ago.
That's right.
He grabbed some guy by the t-shirt and whipped him around, and
yeah, he spilt his gimmick of fries. I saw that.
Yeah. And then the kid was so happy, right?
Oh, he was over the moon. It's funny because I ended up I talked to Marty Goldstein after the fact, and I said, hey, what happened with that was Dragon Eel, I think it was. What happened with Dragon Eel and that fan? He goes, I'm not really sure. I'll get back to you. So yeah. So obviously a couple of huge names that we kind of glossed over here. One American, one Canadian that we're going to talk about. We'll talk about the American first. Lou Thesz, who is like any wrestling fan anywhere clearly knows the legend and lore of Lou Thesz, but you could almost say that Lou Thesz made Whipper Watson, but then Whipper Watson kind of also remade Lou Thesz at the same time.
100%. Good analogy. He was injured. They needed someone trustworthy. This is only what I've read. You've probably seen this in different spots also. They needed to put someone over, and Whipper was the guy. So Whipper takes the belt for 8 months or 9 months, whatever it was. Jesse's the detail guy. And guess what? Someone makes a comeback. he's back. He's healthy. He's back. He's not traveling all over the world anymore, and he's the new champion again. Deservedly so, 100%. And there's a guy that was a perfect tweener. He was a great tweener.
Yes.
I loved him for that.
Now, what's more interesting also is another Winnipeg connection, because, you know, when Lou Thesz was looking to wind down, he wanted to pass the belt to George Gordienko, but yes. Gordienko obviously couldn't be the champion because of the whole communism thing, and, you know, something that we discussed in our George Gordienko episode. If you're listening right now to this program, you can go back in the archives after you're done this episode and listen to the Gordienko episode where we go heavy in detail about what happened there. But it's interesting because so Thesz can't make the drop to Gordienko. He picks Whipper Watson, which, to be honest, was probably the better choice in the long run, because as big of a star as Gordienko was, I think Whipper Watson at that time was a bigger transitional star. And you had the option as well with Whipper Watson, who didn't mind dropping it back, right? Whereas Gordienko may have wanted a longer run with it and may have put up more of a fight about, you know, okay, I have it now, maybe I can make a bigger run of this, maybe I can expand more into the States. You know, obviously all of that was kind of kiboshed with the communism charges, and he couldn't go there, and he had the exclusion order. But it is interesting that, you know, Thesz has or wants to drop the belt, and he has a choice, and it's essentially two Canadians. So that part of it is super interesting and really a forgotten piece of the NWA history, in my opinion.
In Gordienko, I don't know your whole episode, and I should listen to it. I understand that those kind of people who were a little on the more shooter side, maybe less patriotic towards the National Wrestling Alliance, they might go somewhere and they might just break someone's arm. Maybe they go to the next place and they hurt someone else because they're protecting themselves, thinking more of themselves and the title.
Yes.
Than what the big picture is.
Yes.
Gordienko was. I saw him actually wrestle on TV in the early 70s when he was working in Montreal.
Oh wow.
Yeah, I can barely remember, but I do remember I did see him. I think he might have been on the AWA in the early 70s too.
Yeah, that would make sense. Yeah, that would line up.
Yeah.
It's interesting that what you bring up about, you know, that's almost the downside of putting the belt on a shooter, right? Is because if you want him to do business, you know, is he going to do and maybe that's why they brought the money stipulation in later on with the NWA belt, because I'm not sure what year that started with, where the holder had to put up the money. I think that was in the 50s, right?
I'm not sure, but I know Buddy Rogers did. So
yes, okay, so we're in and around that area anyway. So, but yeah, Whipper at least was somebody who didn't have a problem, you know, doing the job, if you will, for the betterment of himself, which in this case it definitely was, but more also, you know, in the, you know, it's Lou Thesz, right? Who's gonna say no to putting the belt back on him?
And you know, I know the NWA wasn't programmed out like how the WWF was, which is still absurd. They could have made so much money on Superstar Billy Graham. But
yes, they could. Yeah, that's. Oh my God, that's that.
That's another one. But so when you have guys with the caliber of Thesz, Watson, that other Canadian guy we're going to talk about, you know, they knew there was a big picture, a massive big picture. They understood themselves. They understood the product. They understood the NWA. They understood how to work. They were professionals, and we see that with the NWA. And then, well, you mentioned nowadays. I don't want to talk too much about nowadays. I don't particularly watch it. I just see what I see on my phone.
Yes.
And there's no loyalty. There's no there's nothing.
Yeah,
And there certainly isn't any guys in there that could protect the belt.
No, God, no. Try walking into rookies here like we saw at that show, right? A lot of those guys would be in for a rude awakening. But so, it's funny. We just talked about, the Whipper Watson Lou Thez dynamic, right? Thez makes Watson, Watson makes Thez. You could easily say the same with the dynamic between Gene Kiniski and Whipper Watson, where Whipper Watson kind of made Kiniski, and then Kiniski kind of remade Whipper Watson after the fact.
I think it's kind of reverse of the Thez thing.
Yes.
Because I think Watson made Kiniski more popular, and then vice versa, whereas Watson made Thez more popular because he got the belt in the first place.
Yes. Yeah, and then you look, because obviously Gene Kiniski has a wild run with the NWA title, something that we discussed in our Gene Kiniski episode last year. But you almost don't get that prestige of Kiniski be Canada's greatest athlete if he doesn't have that series of matches and that feud with Whipper Watson, who was essentially Canada's hero at that point in time, because there was the coverage in the CBC. It's here in Western Canada, we have like 3 channels, right? It's the CBC, and you get maybe 2 local stations on your rabbit ears, right?
Yeah.
So, people all across Canada knew who Whipper Watson was, right? Kiniski, this, evil guy from Western Canada, and they sure played it up that way, and rightfully so. And they have their matches. He gets the meteoric rise push, and then goes with the NWA title and tours. But when he comes back, I think is more interesting, because that's kind of at the tail end, not necessarily at the tail end, but towards the tail end of Whipper Watson's career. And they come back and have a series of matches, and again, Whipper Watson is at the top of the card, and they're having amazing feuds, amazing matches.
Yeah. They wrestled in 1957. They wrestled 90 times against each other.
That's incredible.
And that's not the traveling circus that would say the NWA in the 70s and 80s, where the guys just went like this, right?
Yes.
It was a box show that traveled. They were in St. John's, Newfoundland. They were in Regina. Maybe they hit St. Louis. Then they maybe back to Toronto. These guys, 90 times is like what? 3 times? How many times a month? Holy shit!
Yeah, really though. Yeah, almost 30 times a month. Right? That's incredible.
Yeah. 30 into 9 is 3. Yeah.
Because you got to figure the run wasn't that wasn't their whole year either, right? They're still doing other matches in between all of that, which is you think about it in the big picture is mind-boggling.
But it was a perfect feud.
Yes, it was.
And believe me, I'm a huge Kiniski fan. Absolutely. Yeah. We went on a show. Jess and I went on a show with a Ontario referee called Old School Jim Conley, and we did a NWA tournament, and it whittled down to Fez number 1, Ric Flair number 2, and Kiniski 3.
Wow!
And that was a top 16.
Yeah.
1 versus 8 kind of thing, and we whittled them all down, and that was all guys who had held the title more than 1,000 days or something like that.
Oh, so you would have like Harley Race and guys like that. Yeah.
We had Harley Race, Dory Funk, Pat O'Connor, Buddy Rogers. That was a massive list. And there was a couple guys there I didn't even know. I had no idea who they were, and I just went, whatever.
Now, would that be the actual lineage of the NWA, or did you guys include the kind of history that was absorbed into it? Yeah, you know what I'm talking about.
They included Jeff Jarrett. They included some British guy, Nick Aldis.
Yes. Yeah,
okay,
Aldis.
So
yeah.
So there's a few more modern guys. And now I've never heard of Nick Aldis before. I watched the matches. I like him.
Yeah, he's very much in the old vein of things. Although I believe Tim Murdoch is their champion right now. I may have to check my modern wrestling notes, but yeah, going back to our conversation, yeah, you look at guys who just matched up well against each other, and it's Kiniski and Watson is just unbelievable, and even in my Kiniski episode, there was a large portion of that episode where, AC was talking about, the Maple Leaf Gardens aspect of it and just the crowds that were there and how rabid the fans were and people just wanted to see it, right? And even Steve Verrier, how large of a section of the book was talking about that, and Steve was talking about, he could have went into deeper detail almost, but it's really incredible. Just that series of matches and that feud.
I think if I was going to say two wrestlers who I like a lot, I would say Flair and Steamboat. Although Flair, in my eyes, he's not anywhere near what Kiniski was being the heel.
Yes.
But I would compare those two for the amount of times they wrestled, and the places they wrestled, and the aura of their matches.
Yeah, I would agree.
You could say the Sheik in Bobo Brazil.
Yes.
Because you got those two guys there that have wrestled against each other so many times, but there's no wrestling.
Yes. Yeah, it's a war. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, naturally we've talked about, some of the big feuds, but one thing we've kind of neglected to mention is some of the big houses that were involved with Whipper Watson in some of these feuds. And, we've talked, AC has been on this program a couple of times before, and we've talked about some of the houses, in the Maple Leaf area, 10, 12, 13, 14,000, and you're talking about each and every day on a circuit. But Whipper's one who correct me if I'm wrong, please, but he set every attendance record from I want to say the late 40s, almost throughout the entire 50s and into the 60s in Maple Leaf Gardens.
100%. 100%. No doubt about it. There's no one bigger. I'm sure if we could look at the stats, and AC has those stats, you could say, okay, Watson is not going to be on 3 cards in a row, and it's every day, every week.
Yes, that's the most important part, yes.
The crowd's dipped when he wasn't on the cards.
Yeah,
I bet $1 million.
And it's crazy because, he's drawn, what was the number that they used to draw in Maple Leaf Gardens? It was 17 and change, right?
17.5 was like a sellout.
Yeah, that was the absolute, you were turning people away. And you can look through the years, 40s, 50s, 60s, and these attendance numbers, and he's drawing week after week after week after week when he's there. I should specify that because that's an important part of this equation that we're going to talk about. But not only was he a big draw in Maple Leaf Gardens, but he was a huge draw in St. Louis, which I found fascinating because, you hear about, the kind of cards that they were running there. Obviously, Sam Muchnick, and you heard about the payoffs that and apparently he was a very fair payoff guy.
Yeah.
And I mean, money is something that we can discuss in a little bit, I suppose, but, some of the crowds that they were drawing with Whipper there versus whoever the opponent was, or Whipper versus the hometown guy, however you wanted to phrase it, but they were drawing huge in St. Louis, massive crowds.
And that's testament to how a guy gets over. There's got to be that point of charisma that holds no matter where he's going to be. And whether it's St. Louis, okay, we know what he did in Toronto. We know it's drawing power here, but when you can do it somewhere else, that's not necessarily. No one knows about Whipper Watson's Safety Club in St. Louis. No one knows that none of the kids there are signed up, for this charity he has, for this school thing he has, right? Where 100,000 kids signed up for this safety thing that they get a little bulletin with his picture on it or something. So that transitioning from being such a big star to other cities proves his power, his draw.
Now, there's something else that you brought up earlier on in the program that we're really going to circle back to here is when Whipper bought into the St. Louis territory. Now, obviously that, kind of goes into how big of a story was, because obviously you're not getting a piece of the territory if you're not drawing, right?
Yeah.
So was that more Tunney and Watson going into the territory, or was that something where Watson kind of gave, a piece of his part to Watson, or what was the dichotomy there?
I'm not really 100% sure of the dichotomy, although I know around that time frame, Tunney had been the president of the NWA. It was only once.
Yes.
And I've read that a lot of people did this. And, Briscoe's probably owned part of Florida. Different guys owned Sheik even owned part of different territories too at one time or another,
yes.
Right? So I think, I don't know the facts, I really don't, so I shouldn't even surmise, other than it's a known fact, and they probably went together because he was Tunney's moneymaker for sure.
Yeah, so it would make sense at that point that he wants to kind of protect his investment, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Right, and because he's such a drawing power in St. Louis, it would almost make sense that you want to have that business connection as well as the, fan connection between, Whipper Watson and what's happening in St. Louis.
So, maybe I've just popped into my mind. Maybe Frank was thinking, if Whipper ever gets to be the NWA champion, and he's my guy, if we buy into St. Louis and he does get it, I'm going to get the National Wrestling Alliance champion in my house.
Yes.
A lot more.
That's an excellent point. You know what? I never would have thought about it like that. That's an excellent point.
Because that was one of the problems with Quebec. They wanted a world champion, and they couldn't get one, so they created Yvon Robert, the Montreal Athletic Commission world title. And then that tied up the Boston world title from Montreal, which is back in the 40s also, right?
Because that would have got tied up with the AWA title out of Boston, I believe, at that point.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Which, that's a talking about a can of worms that we could go into, I'm sure that.
Yeah, so that just popped into my mind, and I'm thinking that's probably one of the reasons.
Yeah, that's a tremendous. You know what? I can 100% agree with that supposition. I think that makes a ton of sense, right? If you really boil down to the dollars and cents, X's and O's, whatever you want to say, that absolutely makes sense. Now, we talked about some of the feuds. The houses were incredible. Some that we talked about with Jesse earlier on in the program tonight. But something that we didn't talk about with Jesse was what kind of happened at the end of Whipper Watson's wrestling career. We had discussed his horrific accident which ended it, but we didn't really discuss what happened after the accident. And this was something that I was really surprised to learn about was the charity side of Whipper Billy Watson. Can we discuss a little bit about what happened after the accident that Whipper Watson had that ended his career and how he got into the charitable side of things?
Sure. I just wanted to say one thing, that something is forgotten and not known overall by most people was that the wild man, Dave McKegney, here in Ontario.
Yeah, there. Well, we're neighbors still, so there's that.
Him and Watson went into partnership.
Oh, that's right too.
In the mid '60s. Dave McKegney was starting to run all the smaller towns, and he was getting more of a draw and more of a pull. And him and Watson went together so that Watson had the connections. Dave had he had some guys. He had like a small troop, right, of guys, and they worked together for about 2 or 3 years, and it was really successful. Wild Man, Dave McKegney ran mostly in the summertime. So they were hitting all the small towns, arenas that were empty, and they were doing really, really well. Because of Watson being with him, they were able to pull some fantastic stars. Moolah wrestled for them. Hans Schmidt, lots of people that were in the area wrestled for those. I don't have a name for the company. I just never found that information. But they did form a partnership up until about 1969.
Yes, that's correct, yes.
But after that, Lord Layton was really, really famous for announcing in the area, in Cleveland and Detroit and Toronto, and then back to Australia, and then back again to Ontario. And he was very famous because he was a Shriner. And I think that's where Abdullah Farooq got the fez idea.
Yes.
For the manager for the Sheik. Watson never took that path, but he blew it out of the water. I got a small list here. He was an active member in the following charities. He worked for Cystic Fibrosis, the Hugh McMillan Center for Crippled Children, which is a very famous hospital in Toronto.
Yes.
Multiple sclerosis. The Rumball Center for the Deaf, which is deaf beef. You say spaghetti, I say spaghetti. The Canadian Paraplegic Association, and those were all things that he was involved in. And he would go speak at the dinners and things like that. But his fundraising was phenomenal. He invented winter cavalcades and snow festivals. He did summer things. He actually, in some degree, became more famous after his career.
Yes.
I know Jesse says that he was talking about Whipple Watson, and that's the guy who was doing all the fundraising for the crippled kids. They knew that more than wrestling.
Yes.
So, go ahead.
And there was some interesting anecdotes that I had read over my research about him and the charities, where it was like, if he would do anything almost, provided that it was not like, somebody trying to take advantage of him being the wrestling star, right? If he knew that it was for, like, specifically for a charity and they needed whatever, he was all in. But if it was somebody who, had deep pockets and maybe they were just trying to take advantage of, the Whipper Watson name, then he would kind of maybe not be associated with that, which I think is an interesting part of it as well.
The aspect of him being tied to anything had to have been, because of his persona, had to have been 100% true.
Yes.
He was not going to turn his name with something that wasn't 100% bona fide. Excuse me.
Wait, and some of the numbers that I've read for, some of the amounts of charities that have gone on throughout the year, because there's still a lot of these still have his name tied to them, and you're talking about amounts in the millions or tens of millions of dollars that have been raised since that. I'm looking at Easter Seals, for example. Throughout his time with them, into the future now, and Easter Seals is something that's also here in Manitoba. They're over the $16 million mark, and you got to think, like, that doesn't start without Whipper Watson, which is really incredible. And the amount of money that's been raised continually year after year because of, him getting it off the ground, him being a part of it. And then, maybe today people don't know that part of it. Maybe they don't know how much he put into it at the beginning of it, if you will, but my God, it's really incredible and really a testament to him as an individual.
As a human being.
Yes.
Not just a star.
Yeah, because he didn't have to do it, right? He could have easily sat at home and counted his money.
Yeah, 100%. And we look at that he was a successful businessman away from the ring, and he just took that into his whole life was charity, which is a phenomenal attribute to have.
Yes.
I mean, we all like to volunteer. We all like to share our time with organizations. I know I have in the past more than I should have probably. but he just transitioned his life from the ring right into charities.
Which, obviously his wrestling career was incredible, and you can probably say it may never be duplicated the way that he did. I don't think it could ever be duplicated, to be honest with you, the way that he had it all. But my goodness, you look at some of the wrestlers who are big now for charity, the John Cena's and whatever, and great, fantastic stuff that they're doing, but it's oftentimes company setups, right?
You don't like to think that, but it probably is. Yes.
Yeah. Whereas Whipper Watson just kind of, I understand his career was out, but he didn't have to do what he did, right? And the fact that he did it is absolutely incredible.
I don't think that people like that made anymore.
I hope that there is, but
I shouldn't be negative, but I think that it just won't be people like that.
Well, I hope you're wrong. That's the optimist part of me, I guess.
Maybe they fly under the radar.
Well, if they do, I wish they didn't almost, so we could have something to,
be uplifted by.
Yeah, especially now, right? You look at today's environment. I'm not just specifically talking about wrestling at this point, but it's you almost need somebody to look up to like that, who is selfless and would just go out of their way to do stuff. And boy, oh boy, if we could have a few more Whipper Watsons in this country right now, I think we'd be in a hell of a position, I think.
We'd be in a lot better position, yes.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. You know what, Wes, this has been absolutely tremendous. Before I let you go, is there anything that we didn't cover that you wanted to touch on?
Not really. I wish I had been a little bit more with details, but it's great to talk to you. Great to be on the show with you. I'm really looking forward to listening to. I listened to part of the Gene Kiniski episode, so I'm looking forward to going back and listening to that.
Sure.
I just love Gene Kiniski.
He's so great. It's incredible. Yeah, that was one of my favorite episodes from season 1. And you know what? My only regret about doing that one is that I did it so early in the first season. But
okay.
But yeah, this has been great. You know what? Before I let you go, because I love what you guys are doing with the clippings and with the podcast. So once again, can you let everybody know where they can find the clippings page on Facebook, and as well where they can find the podcast on YouTube?
Sure, it's the NWCA, National Wrestling Clippings Alliance, and that's both the podcast on YouTube and the Facebook page. The Facebook page shows clippings from all over the world, pictures, posters, whatever we dig up, stories. Our other pages are the Ontario Wrestling Clippings of the Past, and then my longest running Facebook page is the Wild Men, which is coming up to 7 years old.
Wow.
I think about 1,100 members, many of whom are either former wrestlers or families of wrestlers. And one of my favorite things to do, and Jesse also, who's my partner, on the show, out family members who don't have anything to show for their parents' careers.
Awesome.
And I don't think there's close to 50 people we've helped find at least something.
Wow.
Even just one ad of a guy who was only wrestled for 3 or 4 years. His dad's been gone for like 20 years and he's got nothing, and that means so much to some of these people, right?
That's
incredible.
incredible.
One of the things we love doing.
I love that. That's so incredible. And for anybody listening, you can look in the show notes of today's episode. You'll find a link to the YouTube page as well as a link to the Facebook group. Wes, this has been so much fun. I have to have you on again and pick your brain. I think there's a few more subjects du jour, if you will, that'll be coming up in the near future.
Let's hit the wrestling story of North Dakota.
Let's do it.
So, thank you so much for having me on. It's been really nice to talk with you. I love the idea of sharing history. I love the idea of wrestling podcasts. I wish you continued success also.
Now, before we head to the finish of tonight's program, there is one more audio clip that I wanted to play. Now, this one is an interesting interview from the CBC, and it really shows the personal side of Whipper Watson. Not so much, not the showman, not the always working guy, not even the lighthearted philanthropical guy, but the guy who put his body on the line night after night, the guy who was hurt all the time, the guy who woke up sore each and every day and still went out and performed, like I said, over 1,500 career matches. And of that 1,500 career matches, had won 874 of them for a winning percentage of 58.1%. In this clip, you're going to hear Whipper Watson really explain the toll that wrestling took on his body. And I think that kind of also feeds into what we were talking about with both Jess and Wes, you know, the grind of wrestling and then how it was tragically cut short. But, you know, fortunately, unfortunately, maybe it was a good time to get out of wrestling itself because, you know, as a lot of guys say, right, Father Time does no jobs. And that much is true for all of us, no matter if you're, you know, someone like myself or you're a superstar wrestler like Whipper Watson. So I'm going to play this audio clip. I think it's really eye-opening. I think it's a really good bookend to our Whipper Watson conversations. And on the other side, we're going to close this thing up. But don't go away because I have some interesting tidbits to pass along, some great information that I just learned myself regarding some great projects in regards to Grappling with Canada, and just some fun things to pass on to all of you. So please enjoy this audio. Like I said, I think it's going to be really eye-opening for many people. And on the other side, make sure you stick around because I have a lot of fun things to impart on everybody, if you will. So enjoy this, and we'll see you on the other side.
Are those wrestlers we see on television just putting on a show, and is the whole thing a put-on? I asked Whipper Billy Watson if a wrestler can actually get hurt.
Well, I had my eye taken out a number of years ago. I only have 10% vision in my left eye because of a wrestler, a fellow by the name of Chopper Sims. This is when I was wrestling in England. He put his thumb in and put the eyeball on my cheek, and I only have 10% vision in my left eye. I've had, I guess pretty close to 250 stitches around my face and different parts of my body. I've had my nose broken 5 times. I've had a plastic surgeon on this one eye here because of a very bad gouge. You could just put the side of your hand inside my eye, and I continued on with this bout because it happened earlier on. I was wrestling in Belleville one night, And fortunately, when they took me to the hospital, they had a plastic surgeon there, and he did a very good job. I had to lay off for quite a time. And I've had my ribs broken 7 times and shoulder broken several times, and I've had every finger. And as you notice, this one here is broken. I'm just getting over a broken finger on this hand. And I had all the discs disintegrate in my neck. I was in St. Michael's Hospital for 2 months in traction. And, I could go all the way down the line to broken toes and torn ligaments and things like this. And you probably say, well, how come you're able to walk around? Well, it's surprising, and I try to tell the young people that how important it is to take care of your body. If you have a healthy body, it's surprising you can get over many illnesses and also injuries that you have. And like I have always stressed that, especially more so today about kids, smoking. And I feel that smoking is more harmful to the body than anything else that I know of. Of course, we are into the drugs today, and but the smoking, I think that sometimes smoking leads into the drugs. But if we could stop our youngsters and make them realize the damage that they are doing to their bodies, if they would think of putting something into their body that's going to sort of build it for the future. And if they want to smoke when they get older, well, that's up to them. But when they're young, I feel they should lay off the cigarettes.
Billy, in addition to being an accepted and great wrestler, you have built up a reputation over the years as being terribly interested in the welfare of children, and your last few words there verified that. But crippled children especially, you have a great interest in crippled children.
Well, I probably have got more of the crippled children than they have from me, because when I go to visit with these young people, they do something for me that no one else can do. First of all, they make me realize how fortunate I am that I have a strong, healthy body, and sometimes I wish that I could trade places with some of them because I feel of the sufferings that they go through. And I think that like many other athletes and people in the entertainment world, we come in contact with these people so much that I found in the early stage of my career, which is going over 20 years now, which I've been associated with crippled children, and going to the hospitals and going to the treatment centers, that I actually enjoy being with them. As I say, it sort of gives you a lift.
That's Whipper Billy Watson, the tough guy with a soft heart for crippled children.
All right, before we wrap it up for tonight, just really once again want to thank Wes and Jess for joining the program tonight, the tag team behind the National Wrestling Clipping Alliance podcast. Gentlemen, it was an absolute pleasure to have you both in the program. It was my pleasure to have joined you on yours as well. And I think between our 2 sets of programs, there's going to be a lot of information for not just wrestling fans, but Canadian history buffs, if you will, to digest, chew on, if you will. And like I said, it was my pleasure both times to have discussed some Canadian professional wrestling history with the both of you. Once again, I want to thank you, the listener. You could have done anything else with your time when you were listening to this program in the world. The world is such a beautiful place. But you made the conscious decision to join us today, and I'm forever indebted to you, the listener, for that. Now, at the top of the program, I did say that outside of voting for Grappling With Canada, which if you haven't done that, go ahead and do that right now over at canpodawards.ca. Once again, voting closes July 13th, so run, don't walk to do that. But there is one other thing that you can do for me. You can tell one person that you've never told that you listen to this show to come and give it a shot. Wrestling might not even be their thing. Canadian history might not be their thing. But the human interest stories may just be their thing. So, I'm asking you, the listener, reach out to at least one person. Let them know what we're doing here. Shoot them the link. Have them check it out. It'd mean the world to me. This thing is growing exponentially because of you, the listener. And every month, I'm beyond humbled to get the emails, to get the DMs, to get the tweets from all of you who are enjoying this program, who are learning so much, who are also teaching me in part as well at the same time. And it really is, it's really an incredible feeling. And I owe it, for the most part, to you, the listener. So, do me that one small favor. Share this program with a friend. Even if you don't think it's up their alley. You never know. Once again, you can contact me many different ways. You can email me at sixsidepod@gmail.com. I read absolutely everything that you guys send. You can hit me on Twitter at 6_podcast. You can, once again, find this program, as I said at the top of the program, on all major podcasting platforms. But more specifically, remember to leave a 5-star rating and a written review on Apple Podcasts. And when those roll in, sometimes they take a couple of months. So if you've left one and you haven't heard your review left and you're sitting there going, God damn, Taxman didn't read my review, it's not my fault. There's kind of a delay between, when you submit it to Apple Podcasts and when I actually see it. So, if you sent one, cool. It's coming up. If you haven't, get on it, because I could have been reading it already. But, send your 5-star rating and written reviews on Apple Podcasts, and when I receive them, then I will make sure that I give you a shout out and read them aloud on the next available podcast. One thing I didn't mention at the top of the program is the official merchandise store for Grappling With Canada. grapplingwithcanada.threadless.com is where you can find all of the t-shirts, tanks, hoodies, whatever you want in terms of merchandise for Grappling With Canada. And as usual, I always say this, but it does bear repeating, that all of the proceeds from the classic Grappling With Canada logo, that's with the maple leaf, very fitting that we are in July, and July 1st, more specifically, all the proceeds of that shirt are being donated to charity. So pick up a shirt, it goes to a good cause. Also, the ways that you can financially support this program, because unfortunately there is a hefty cost, if you will, to do all this. So you can help me big time take a load off my shoulders, if you will, by donating to the program. There's various ways to do it. You can find it in the Linktree link on the show notes today. The tip jar function on Good Pods. You can send a donation via PayPal, as well as you can buy me a beer or 2 or 5 or more at buymeacoffee.com/grappling. Also, I just want to say there is no donation too small, certainly no donation too big either, I should say. And everything that you guys do donate gets invested directly back into the podcast. Goes towards research, subscriptions for things like newspaper.com, etc., etc., etc. So, anything that you guys donate to the program, you get a big shout out, and you know that it's where it's going, right? It's going right back into this show. Also, keep it locked on all social media, whether that's Grappling With Canada on Twitter, whether that's Grappling With Canada on Instagram, whether it's on the Facebook page, or whether it's on the Canadian Professional Wrestling History Facebook group. Once I have all of the legalities figured out in regards to our fundraising event for a very golden item from a 3-lettered organization, we'll say, that would fit nicely on your waist area, if you will. I don't want to give too much away, but if you read between the lines, I think you'll pick up what I'm putting down. So keep it locked on all socials to find out what I'm doing in regards to that. I think it's going to be a cool little event, and I'm looking forward to engaging in regards to that. Don't forget, by the way, get your questions in for Vance Nevada for the follow-up episode, the Q&A. Grill Vance Nevada. Grill him, send him hardball questions. Let's test this dude. Let's see what he's got. I think you'll be impressed. Get your questions in. You can email them to me at sixsidepod@gmail.com. You can send them whether it's through the Facebook group or the Facebook page or on Twitter at 6_podcast. Get them in while the getting's good. You don't want to be that guy, when the Vance Nevada episode part 2 comes up in the podcast feed, sitting there going, man, I wish I would have asked blank. Don't wish, do it. Send that message, send your question, and let's have a lot of fun with the Q&A episode with Vance Nevada regarding the Uncontrolled Chaos book, which is upcoming very, very shortly. I'm really looking forward to that. I know quite a few of you are as well. So, for all of that being said, I hope that you guys enjoyed the program today. I hope that you've been enjoying the direction that Season 2 has gone, although today's episode did not follow our Unsolved Mysteries theme specifically, although the Nanjo Singh part of it did certainly fit into the theme of this second season of Grappling with Canada. I hope that everybody's enjoying the season. I hope that you really enjoyed this episode. And I hope that you'll share it with a family member, a friend. Share it on Twitter. Share it on Facebook. This thing grows because of you, the listener. Point blank, period. So thank you for your time. Thank you for your consideration. Thank you for hanging out with myself and my tremendous guests today. And with all that being said, happy Canada Day. I hope everybody was safe and enjoyed themselves. Happy 4th of July to our American affiliates down south. Please be safe. And I hope that you all enjoy yourselves. And I hope that you will all join us for our special and join us for our August episode. It's going to be a great one. Until then, I will leave you as I always do. And I especially mean it now. Please, everyone, take care of yourselves and each other. See you next time.